the bottom line, the Stone Cold Sensei.
I have a lot of things I want to get off my chest.
This is The Pencil, a professional wrestling podcast starring Renny D and friends. Thanks for listening to The Pencil. Subscribe to the show on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Pencil Podcast.
Hey, this is Chris Jericho. You're listening to The Pencil with Renny D. Pencil, baby. He's a pencil. Yeah, boy.
What's up, guys? Welcome inside the tank here in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. Another great episode of The Pencil. Episode 24 here on the Professional Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, professional wrestler Renny D. I guess I am also a connoisseur of many things, and recently we decided we're going to be connoisseurs of wine. I don't know why. And with me, as always, is... Oh, fuck, man, you can introduce yourself.
You know who it is. It's Travis Mr. It's Dirty. He's here. I'm excited about this wine idea that we've got. I'm thinking we might need to dive into it during episodes, say, 25 through 30, and then maybe just give our listeners a little idea of, hey, what tastes good, what doesn't taste good, and if we get a little messed up at the end of our segments, you'll know why.
It is, I mean, it's not like it's be the first time we sat and had an alcoholic beverage during a podcast. Case in point, our 3-hour conversation with Ken Anderson, and tonight... you people will get part 2 of that lengthy conversation. And in part 2, we really focused in on the days and times in World Wrestling Entertainment, his time in WWE. You're going to hear things tonight that you've never heard before. We told you last week, we scrubbed the internet looking for some of the stuff he told us, whether it was about TNA or with tonight's episode, WWE, and we couldn't find some of the stuff that was out there before, whether it be on dirt sheets, Wikipedia, whatever. But I'm excited for the fact that we get to give you guys part 2 of this awesome podcast with Ken, and it's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to the feedback. The feedback from episode 1 or part 1 with him has been absolutely outstanding. Everybody loved it. Everybody liked it. I thought we covered quite a bit of ground in part 1, and we cover a lot of ground here in part 2.
It's a ton of stories. It's a lot of stuff that, like you said, it's just things that people haven't heard. It's things that we didn't know all about, and the conversation was enjoyable to be there, and I hope people enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoyed having it there with Ken. So it was in the comfort of his own home, and he really opened up to us.
Absolutely, and before we get too far along in this podcast, as always, this is a fan, listener-supported podcast. You guys know that if you tuned in before. If this is your first time, definitely hope you like it. If this is your first time, I strongly recommend hitting pause, going and downloading part 1. But I guess you don't have to. There's not a lot of... it's not like a Sons of Anarchy series where you need to watch, the episodes from the season. You can pick up from here if you want to. Highly recommend you check out all the episodes of The Pencil, actually, as we have guests on from New Japan Pro Wrestling, other major independent promotions around America. But do us a huge favor on iTunes. There's this thing that they do, a logarithm or whatever. So you need to rate, review, subscribe, all that great stuff if you can. And if you have social media, go ahead and share our link on Facebook, Twitter, Vine, Instagram, whatever it might be. Visit us online, pencilpodcast.com. We're at Pencil Podcast on Twitter, /Pencil Podcast on Facebook. Just spread the word for us if you could. We're trying to do the best we can, but the more people that listen to this podcast, the better, and we're really trying to bring some awesome guests. And some of the guests we have coming up is Jimmy Caderas, former WWE referee, the man who was in the ring the night Owen Hart fell to his death. We also have Pat Buck from Pro Wrestling Syndicate, who just came off an extraordinary debut in the New York market on TV. So, and strictly, the reason why we bring some of the guests on this show is, A, we want to keep it interesting. B, we know the wrestling fan out there is very diverse. I posted some stuff on Reddit Dirt about I wrote an article about Arya Davari recently that I just posted on pencilpodcast.com. Arya Davari is an independent worker here in Minneapolis. Just saw him work at WrestlePalooza 5 here at First Avenue. They sold it out, 1,050 people. Prince didn't even sell at First Avenue at the beginning of the day. So it's a pretty big deal. But and I got some comments from people on Reddit that said that they stopped reading my article as soon as I mentioned that I attended WWE events. Like, they're anti-WWE. And I get that people can be anti-WWE, and I'm fine with that. But the reason that I go to the WWE, a couple things, is I have friends who work for the promotion. I still enjoy all sorts of professional wrestling, although at times WWE can be vastly stale. But I'm not going to, WWE is still wrestling to some extent to me. But also, for the people who are WWE haters and you just can't stand what you see on Mondays and now Thursdays and even one Sunday a month, let's give you some independent stuff. And if you bitch about Pro Wrestling Syndicate, then I don't know what to do for you. Like, I'm trying my best. I brought you New Japan. I'm bringing you Pro Wrestling Syndicate. I just brought you TNA and WWE. But give us suggestions. If you guys want to hear a certain wrestler, and, we don't want to bring on everybody and anybody just because somebody says that we should bring them on. But if there's a reason and there's a story that can be told that you guys can learn something that, most importantly, even like Dirt and I, we want to learn a lot too when we do this, we'll definitely do it. So you can bitch all you want about WWE, and that's fine. You're definitely entitled to your opinion, but just know that we're trying to do the best that we can to not strictly keep things WWE and bring you a wide variety of different forms of wrestling across not just the United States, but across the world. With that being said, I think we're probably going to jump right into their favorite brand of wrestling, WWE. And I just got back from Portland literally like several hours ago. And on the West Coast, they preempt Monday Night Raw because it's a primetime show. So it's on at 7 o'clock here Central Time for you, Dirt. It technically could be on live at 5 o'clock in the West Coast. They don't do that. So I checked the TVGuide.com listings. It says it comes on at 8 o'clock. I get to my room at like 8:40 after a couple beers. I throw on the USA Network, and Chrisley's No Best is on, or whatever the hell that show is. I didn't even get a chance to watch Raw, so I had to catch up on Raw via WWE.com, watch highlights. I texted you. You told me things that were worth watching. I checked it out.
It wasn't a very long list.
Yeah, and you told me maybe 3 things to check out. What you seen the show from top to bottom. I mean, any takeaways, any thoughts that you want to share? You got a lot more probably on Monday's product than I do.
Seth Rollins is the real deal. If we didn't know it before Monday, we do now. He's in that top echelon. He's in the same conversation. He belonged in the ring with Lesnar and Cena at the beginning, during the show, and for sure at the end. He stood toe-to-toe with Paul Heyman on the mic, and he ended the show with his music playing and both Cena and Lesnar down in the ring. And there's not much, you can probably count the amount of guys on one hand that has happened to in the last decade. And if he wasn't the next guy before Monday night, he for sure is the next guy now. And you can talk all you want about whoever's going to win the Rumble and who's going to do this, and if Reigns is going to become a little better on the mic, or if Daniel Bryan's going to main event WrestleMania, whatever you think's going to happen, one thing's for sure, 2015 is going to be Seth Rollins' year.
Great talent. Absolutely great talent. And those of you who are anti-WWE, this is my point. Like, you can be anti-WWE all you want. You can love the independents, and you can love Pro Wrestling Syndicate and PWG and think these guys are the greatest in the world. And some of them are. But at the end of the day, they all share one common goal. They don't want to be the best independent wrestler in the world. They want to be on WWE TV. So you can look at Finn Balor, for instance, Fergal Devitt or Prince Devitt, whatever you want to call him. He went to WWE, and he said it was the best decision he made of his entire life. Just recently said that. There are going to be people who listen to this podcast or sit on their couch and critique the product left and right that have no idea what it's like to be in that ring. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And they're entitled to their opinion. But just remember, nobody has the goal of being the best indie worker in the world. Nobody has the goal of being Ring of Honor World Champion. Nobody has the goal of being TNA Wrestling World Champion. And Ken Anderson even alluded to that basically last week on the podcast, saying, like, there's the WWE title and everything else. Your job as an indie worker is to strive for the best. The best is WWE, whether or not you like that or not. They're the best wrestlers in the world, and they're getting paid like it. And it's just a combination of a lot of things. And Seth Rollins is awesome. Great on the mic. I got a chance to watch that clip. Brock Lesnar, I don't think should have taken the mic and talked, but it is what it is.
I was surprised that he didn't make a mockery of it, though. A lot of times he's been worse. I thought that was certainly not his worst work. I kind of liked that he alluded to that he's certainly taken down Triple H. He's slayed Cena, and now he's going to beat up Rollins. Like, I like that idea of bringing, at least he brought everybody in the ring together. He's not the best on the mic, but the guy's a goddamn beast, and he's got the look of a beast that's going to have the belt, and he's going to put somebody over. And guys get a lot of shit for not putting people over enough. We hear about Cena, we hear about Triple H, we hear about fans complaining about big stars that don't put over young talent, and I got a very good feeling that over the next 3 months, Lesnar's going to be on his back more than we've seen lately, and I don't know that he cares that he's going to be on his back, because he's going to cash that check, and there's going to be young stars that are going to get better because of it.
Lesnar's not re-signing with WWE. Let's get that straight. He's not re-signing a WWE contract. He's going to Bellator or UFC. It's a fact. He's not coming back. If he comes back, I will be absolutely shocked, stunned, whatever it is. And the triple threat match, I think, really kind of foreshadows that him not re-signing. Obviously, I thought the finish was great. I thought having Rollins be strong the way he was awesome for his character. Build him up now because he's not winning the title at Rumble.
Correct.
And the only
which we are 10 days away, by the way. Anybody that watched Raw might not have been able to tell, because as of Raw, we had, 3 people that we knew that were in the Rumble? 4, maybe? There's more that's going to happen tomorrow night on SmackDown, but I just feel we're 10 days away, and the Royal Rumble match needs more attention than what it's been given. I like what they're doing with the triple threat. I think it's going to be exciting, but to take another look at the Raw, what did you, I guess you didn't see it all, but what do you think they're doing 10 days away?
One thing that I do like, and I did read an article, I don't know if it was Bleacher Report or where it was from, but the mystery surrounding the Royal Rumble, like who's actually going to be in it, could be a good thing. We know that there are, 4 or 5 as of Monday Night Raw, and obviously SmackDown's going to go ahead and say there's more. And then in lieu of main event next week, or in replace of main event, they're doing a lottery or something, I guess is what I read. I actually kind of like the fact that they don't reveal everybody. Like, they should maybe reveal 5 to 10, but leave 20 of them, 30 of them as a mystery, and bring back names that it's a Royal Rumble, for Christ's sakes. There's 40 people or 30 or whatever they're going to do. There's room to have people who aren't on an active roster come in and do something. So I do like that. As far as other matches on the card, they're going to make them as we go along yet. We still have 10 days, like you said.
It's a 3-hour pay-per-view, correct?
Yeah.
They've got 2 matches, a Royal Rumble and a triple threat. There's no chance that triple threat's getting less than 30 minutes. And the Rumble's going to get an hour at least, maybe a little more. They really only need 3 more matches, and they've got next week to do it. I believe we're going to have a tag team championship match, probably Mizdow and Miz against the Usos again, because they've wrestled 650 times in the last 4 weeks.
Right.
So I assume that's where they're going. And after that, I mean, they're going to have an hour to fill. They can fill that with fucking replays of SmackDown and Raw, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the only other thing on Raw that Daniel Bryan, I mean, we kind of know that they need to have him wrestle before Rumble, which is good. It's on the Thursday night premiere of SmackDown. Kane, anybody could have guessed that. He's the one that, quote unquote, injured him. The Dean Ambrose thing I thought was really funny. I enjoyed watching it from an entertainment aspect. I just don't know what they're doing with him and where unless I missed it. I don't know if I missed something on Raw.
No, you didn't. They really gave no idea other than his music hit when Rusev was in the ring, but they're both going to be in the Rumble, so maybe that's what's going to happen at Fastlane, maybe something like that to continue to put Rusev over. I just can't imagine that if Ambrose is going anywhere, how many feuds in a row can he lose, I guess.
Right. The other thing from Raw that I didn't watch was the Roman Reigns promo, but I also heard his promo from SmackDown was terrible.
Oh God, it was bad. And it's not all him. It's whoever's writing him. But he's the guy on the screen. He's the guy that's going to get the credit when he does well. So I'm going to give him the blame when he does poorly.
He needs to fight back when it comes to that. If he knows the lines are terrible, you need to step up and say something. You can't just sit there and do it because, I mean, how many times do people have to say on their podcast that, hey, this is what I did. If I didn't like something, I told it. It's your character, Roman Reigns. Like, you're supposed to be the future of this company, and you're just bombing.
It's awkward, man. It's painful to watch. The last 2 times he's had the microphone in his hand have been 2 of the worst. And I don't know if when he's unscripted, I don't feel all his stuff has been terrible.
No, I don't feel it's scripted. Yeah, but you can feel that it's not scripted. He's got maybe a couple bullet points to hit. It literally feels like every word of every line is scripted and he memorizes it, and it's just the presentation of it is terrible.
We're 10 days out. We don't want to take a ton of time on Raw, obviously, but the only other thing we can probably touch on, and then I've got 1 or 2 questions for you. Daniel Bryan, obviously, is back. He was in the ring with Stephanie McMahon. He's going to be in the Rumble. Do you think he's back full-time, or do you think they're using him in this time of the year and he's still hurt?
I think he's back full-time. I mean, he took a couple bumps on Monday that it felt like he wanted to take. I mean, he's been at the Performance Center getting ready for it. I think he's back full-time. I can't see him doing any part-time schedule or just... I mean, he might not work as much as he did, but I think he's still a full-time wrestler. I think he could be, not a John Cena schedule, but more like a Randy Orton schedule, but it's not like where he's only working pay-per-views and nothing else. I think he'll be back even working matches on Raw and SmackDown on a regular basis.
All right, and with what happened in the last 8 days, 9 days, 2 Raws and a SmackDown, and now we've got one more Raw before the Rumble, has anything changed with your idea of who you think is winning the Rumble, who you think is winning the Triple Threat? I mean, we got 10 days, and I think it would be unbelievable to me if Roman Reigns wins the Royal Rumble.
Reigns can't win. He can't win, and if he does, it's going to be a mistake. It's going to be like Batista winning last year. I think the fans are reverting. Like they're going to turn on Reigns for how bad he's been on his. The fans are smart enough, like you guys listening, and we're smart enough to know what good and bad is. It's been terrible. So for him to win, it's just he's not ready. He's not there. And I think at this point, if we're looking at somebody that could potentially win this match, I mean, Daniel Bryan, I think, is more of a favorite than Roman Reigns is.
Yes.
I still think Randy Orton is a big dark horse.
I think Dolph Ziggler's a possibility.
I mean, they'll be back in next week, more than likely, which, I mean, we talked about last week how stupid it is to fire and bring them back so quick, but ridiculous. You have to. I think in the main event, I am my pick right now. I know next week we're doing the picks, but I will be picking John Cena next week to win the world title. Other than that, I mean, and I kind of was leaning towards John Cena even before the triple threat match, and now it is a triple threat match. I think Cena will walk out the champion. I don't think Brock re-signs with the WWE. I think Daniel Bryan, at this point, potentially, I think that he wins the Royal Rumble this year. I mean, he has the fan following that he can main event WrestleMania again.
So if that's the case, then we're looking at a Cena versus Daniel Bryan main event at WrestleMania, which, I mean, they had a main event at SummerSlam that was remarkable a year and a half ago, and it was great. I wouldn't be that upset with that. I'd be shocked if Reigns won it, and I think that doesn't mean that if Reigns doesn't win, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have Lesnar putting over Reigns. Because if Lesnar doesn't win the title, that can still be a match on the card at WrestleMania, and Lesnar can put him over and then push Reigns into having that huge 2015 leading up to WrestleMania in Dallas, and maybe that's going to be his time.
Right.
But if we have that, I'm not against what you're talking about. I also think that sets up nicely for maybe a Rollins cash-in some point between WrestleMania or at WrestleMania.
We got Sting, Triple H somewhere out
there.
We
do?
We're not going to have a Rumble.
Do we have Sting?
We'll
I don't remember.
But the thing is, too, we've been saying
that
Cena was going to go over on Rusev at Mania, so Cena doesn't have to walk into WrestleMania the champion. He could lose it at Fastlane. But, I mean, I think the advertised main event's a tag team match at this point. And they were advertising house shows after Royal Rumble as the world champion John Cena. So I don't know if it was a mistake or whatever it could be. The other thing that I want to touch on before we wrap it up and get to Ken, Macho Man getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, long overdue in my opinion. I loved his charisma and his character. I guess I don't know if you have a take one way or the other actually on him getting in. I mean, he's definitely well deserved. He should have been in there a long time ago.
He should have been in a long time ago, but I think, if you're WWE, you have to keep guys that can be your central person to lead in the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. You can't have The Undertaker, The Rock, Triple H, and Macho Man and Hulk Hogan be going into the Hall of Fame the same year.
Right.
It only makes sense because WWE is not something that is going away. If you save The Undertaker for 4 years, even though he doesn't wrestle, that doesn't mean you're disrespecting him. It just means that you've got things laid out. He can be the main guy going in this year. He can be the main guy going in that year. I don't know that it matters that much, and yeah, it's exciting that he's going in. He obviously deserves it, so he'll be the main guy this year. It'll be interesting to see what kind of speech Hogan can give for him.
And one more thing actually. Surprise entrance to the Royal Rumble. Kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. Who from NXT will be in the Royal Rumble this year? Last year it was only Rusev. He was the only one from NXT. Who do you got from NXT brand? Now, the Accession is main roster, so they're no longer NXT.
They're doing really well.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about them. So, who do you think from NXT? First off, how many do you think they're going to bring from NXT in the Royal Rumble? And do we have any confirmation? Is it 30-man or 40-man?
It's 30.
It's 30, okay.
I can't imagine it'll be more than... Adrian Neville will be in it, I think.
Okay.
And maybe the Hideo Itami.
Okay.
Maybe somebody like that. Finn Balor, maybe, just to get.
So I'm thinking 2 or 3 as well.
So yeah, if we get 2 or 3,
Kevin Steen, I think potentially could be one too because they're pushing the shit out of him on.
On Wednesday, which we can probably pop that on the tube here whenever we get.
Yeah.
done.
So there's gonna be. Do you think that there's any now next week on Raw? We have like the Raw reunion. We have Razor Ramon or Scott Hall is gonna be on there.
Oh yeah.
Whatever. It'll be cool to see him. But do you think that we're gonna see any? Who's gonna be the biggest shock entrant into the Royal Rumble? Not 2 Sundays from now or in 10 days. Like if you had to pick, think of the roster, think who hasn't been here in a while, think of guys not under contract. It's in Philly, so maybe some ECW guys.
That'd be sweet. RVD will probably be in it. I don't know if he's that surprising. Jericho, probably not, if I had to bet. Batista, probably not. Oh, the biggest surprise? I would probably say somebody like Orton, Sheamus, they'll be in it. Oh.
I don't really think there's any like surprise.
Yeah, I'm not
you
sure.
could have Booker T come up from the broadcast because I think JBL did it last year.
Oh yeah, I'm sure Booker T will be in it. That'd be sweet. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there'll be any shocks that we haven't mentioned. To be completely honest, I'd love if Batista came back because he'd probably be a face if he came back and got in the ring with Reigns. I honestly think people would cheer Batista if he was one of the last 4. He wouldn't win it, but it'd be very interesting to just toss him in for a night.
On that note, and I want to end on this, we're never going to get Batista Lesnar, are we? They teased it when Batista and Lesnar were there earlier in the year, and we never got it. And that would be awesome if we could get that.
They never touched each other. That'd be great. That would be a great way for Lesnar to go out. If those two in just a fucking clash of huge fucking dudes at WrestleMania this year, maybe I'd rather have him put over somebody, but fuck, I mean, it's not like people that used to wrestle don't have those types of matches at WrestleMania just for money matches, and Lesnar-Batista would draw.
I'm down. I mean, we're going to have it. It's on the network. Network's in the UK now. Awesome news all around. We're going to wrap it up. Raw wasn't anything to write home about. We don't want to bore you guys with the details of other stuff. We want to get to the Ken Anderson, or Ken Candy, I guess. Mr. Candy, we can call him for this one.
Mr. Kennedy.
It's the WWE version, Mr. Kennedy, for part 2 of the Pencil, the Professional Wrestling Podcast with Mr. Kennedy, talking WWE days. We get in depth about a lot of subjects. Off Mike, we talked about other things that we're not going to reveal, but he's just a down-the-home man and very grateful that he spent the time with us that he did. Can't thank him enough. He just celebrated the first birthday of his little twin, so it's been awesome. We're at Pencil Podcast on Twitter, pencilpodcast.com, Facebook /Pencil Podcast. Travis is at Travis Mester on Twitter. I'm at Real Renny D. Rate, review, subscribe, all that awesome stuff. Hold on, we got a little word here for you, and then it'll be Ken Kennedy talking WWE. Until next week, this is Renny D.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Impact Wrestling superstar, Mr. Anderson. Wait for it, Anderson. You're listening to The Pencil with Renny D and the Dirty.
You've been listening to another great episode of The Pencil, a professional wrestling podcast coming straight at you every Tuesday on iTunes, PodBean, Stitcher, and YouTube. But hang around, we got a lot more to come, because up next is the guest of the evening. We dive right into the world of professional wrestling, asking all the questions that you want answers to. Up next. All right, well, welcome back inside the home of, I would scream right now, Mr. Anderson, but your kids are asleep, so I'm not going to do it. You know, I would do the whole, and here's the thing, too, I shouldn't be, like, introducing you, right? Isn't that your shtick? Like, you're supposed to grab it. If I'm Tony Schiavone, you're, like, grabbing the mic from me and, like, correcting him. And
that's okay, because, you know, I've done it enough that I'm sort of sick and tired of hearing myself talk.
Where did that come from? The mic dropping from the ceiling, you introducing yourself because they kind of do it now again on TV, but you were the first one in a long time to do that.
Well, it's funny because I didn't think about it when it happened. It didn't really play into me actually doing it. But there was a guy that we worked with on the Indies here in Minnesota, named Travis. He's gonna.
Proctor?
If he's listening to this, he's gonna hate me.
No.
Travis Nelson. Travis
Sharp?
Travis Sharp.
Blonde hair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who announced himself when he went out to the ring.
And now he's a ring announcer.
Right. Well, I think that was his deal. He was a ring announcer, but he would wrestle from time to time.
Yeah, once in a while.
And when he went out, he would do his own thing, whatever. And then a couple of years after I started doing it, I was like, yeah, there actually was a guy that did that. But what happened was when I went to OVW, from time to time, you would do promos. Paul Heyman would come down every couple months, and you would have promo class with Paul for 2 days. So Paul would come in, and you were instructed, like, pick an opponent and come up with a promo about that opponent. You're going to wrestle this guy at WrestleMania or whatever. And that was another sort of, sidetracking here. Like, one of the interesting things about that was you were never given too much information. But one of the things that I picked up on early was if you are going to wrestle, you want to be a star in the WWE, and you pick a mid-card or a low-card talent to go against, people are going to just always see you as that. Mm-hmm. So I would always pick like Undertaker or whoever was on top at the time, Triple H, and I would talk about them. So we would have these promo classes, and where were we going with this? I totally just lost my train of thought.
I asked you where this came from.
Oh, where the mic drop came from. So I would go out and I would cut these promos. Paul would come in, I would do the promos, and then I remember from time to time the creative department would come down too, and we would have to do these promos in front of them. And I remember at one point Dave Lagana was one of the creative. He was on SmackDown at the time. He was like the head writer of SmackDown, and he said, there's something with your voice. Because I would go over and I would say, like, what can I do differently? What can I do? What are you guys looking for? And he was saying, there's something with your voice, but I don't know. I don't know what it is. Because I had gone through the military, and I was always sort of drawn to the boot camp, drill sergeant, the way that drill sergeants would talk to people, and that's the way that I always sort of presented my promos. It was like I was a drill sergeant talking to people. And he's like, there's something with your voice, but I just don't know what it is. So then fast forward, Jim Cornette slaps the shit out of Santino Marella backstage at an OVW show. Ends up getting fired. The next week, Paul.
Which was that the smartest thing to do? Because Santino was a legit shoot fighter behind, right? Doesn't he own his own MMA school? Like, he seems like a tough dude.
Like Santino Marella would have whooped.
Right. I mean, I think that's one of the last guys to do it. Yeah.
Most guys in that locker room, Santino Marella is a shoot badass.
Yeah. Between him and, like, I heard Steve Blackman is really tough too. Like, I mean, I would just like, you're gonna slap this dude, and
Blackman has his own MMA thing.
But the thing about Santino is he's such a nice guy. He's so unassuming, and he has respect for those that came before him in the business. And so in that given circumstance, Jim knew nothing about Santino's background as a shoot fighter. He just knew that he was a guy in the amateur class that wanted a job as a wrestler and got mad. And it is what it is. I'm not knocking Jim for what happened or whatever. Like, I don't think it's cool. Looking back on it, I wouldn't do it myself. But I have a ton of respect for Jim Cornette. And he, for whatever, it was, the story goes that, and I was there to I saw the whole thing. It happened right in front of my eyes. The Boogeyman went out to the ring. It was his debut.
This is OVW still.
OVW.
Right.
But they had decided that the Boogeyman was going to be on they were going to put it on TV, I think.
And this is 2005, correct? 2006?
Yeah, 2005. Okay. Yep, I was at OVW. And so the Boogeyman was trying, I don't know if it was Marty Wright was the Boogeyman. He's trying out this new character. He's going to be the Boogeyman. And they had set him up. He was going to come out from underneath the ring and do his whole thing. And, he's just like you've seen on WWE TV. Like, he's a very colorful, charismatic figure. And he came out and did his whole thing. And I remember Santino was one of the guys at the time. He was in the amateur class. So the amateur guys weren't on TV. but they would help out. They were like backstage helpers, runners. And his job that night was to sit right outside the curtain, and anytime anybody would put down, like if they went out to the ring with a robe, he would be the guy that would go and pick the robe up and bring it to the locker room. And so he was sitting there outside the curtain. Boogeyman came out, and he saw it, and he was so entertained by it, he lost track of the moment or whatever and just became a fan and saw what he saw and was entertained by it, and he started laughing. And he was laughing, and when he came, and that stuff was like right on the camera. It was right on TV. This guy who was supposed to be he's a boogeyman. He's fucking the guy that lives underneath your bed. Is coming out from underneath the ring, and this guy's laughing at it because he's entertained by it. So he came back, and Jim was pissed that he laughed at it, and he started paintbrushing him. He's like fucking slapping his face back and forth. So anyway, Jim gets fired. Paul Heyman came in, and Paul Heyman, when he came in, he said, the first night he pulled me aside and said, I'm going to do so much stuff with you. He's like, I've been a fan of yours for a long time now. Paul said, I've been a fan of yours for a long time now. I'm going to do so much stuff with you tonight on TV, and then the next couple of weeks that they will take notice of you. They will have to. There will be no other alternative. And, you know, in the wrestling business, you're told, believe half of what you hear and none of what you hear, half of what you see and none of what you hear, right? Mm-hmm. People tell you stuff all the time. How many indie promoters have you worked for that say, like, we've got a TV deal, we're working on a TV deal?
Name a few.
I bet you are. I bet you are.
I bet you are. And, in fact, I just worked for one a couple of weeks ago that told me the same thing. So, and then he didn't pay his talent at the end of the night at all, including me. Whoa. It was the first time in 15 years that I ever run stiffed on a payday. More on that later.
15 years. That's a good run, though.
So, yeah, because the first time it was attempted earlier in my career, and we actually went to the guy's house. We went to his trailer, and it was like me and 3 or 4 other pretty big guys, and shook him down. But Paul came in, said, this is what I'm going to do, blah, 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 blah. And the first thing I know, he said, I want you to go out there and I want you to cut the ring announcer off. I want you to, like, announce yourself. You're no good. You suck at your job. Let me show you how it's done. Do it yourself. And incidentally, I had been a high school basketball announcer. And at some point during my high school basketball announcing career, somebody had said, like, you should say their last names twice, like the old boxing deal. And so I started doing that, and I remembered it always got over with the crowd. Like, I would have fans from the other team coming up and saying, like, we love your announcing. We love the fact that you do the last name twice. And I just did it. When, Paul told me to do that, and I went out there and I just said, Anderson. And I came back to the locker room, and it wasn't like, hey, you had a great match. It wasn't, I mean, I heard those things from Paul, but from the boys, it was like, when you said your last name twice, that was awesome. And so, again, using the boys as a litmus test, that's sort of the measuring stick, right, for if things are going to work or not. And so I started doing that every week. And then 5 weeks later, literally 5 weeks after I started doing that, I got a call from Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer was in charge of talent relations at the time, or bringing in, acquiring new talent. And he said, they want to bring you to this show in Ohio, and they want to give you a tryout, and they want to see what you're made of. And when I went there, they were telling me that I'm working Funaki, and Johnny said, by the way, we want you to do your whole shtick, like the whole...
Was this your Velocity taping?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
It ended up being it wasn't supposed to be. It was originally just supposed to be a dark match.
Okay.
It was supposed to be Funaki and I in a dark match. He was going over. He was going to win the match. And so we talked everything out. They wanted me to do my intro. At that point, I was just grabbing the mic and from the announcer or whoever, running him down a little bit, telling him he was terrible at his job, and then doing it myself. And then I was going to wrestle with Funaki, and Funaki was going to win. And I was literally in gorilla position doing push-ups. And this is explosion, or not explosion.
Whoa, hey, wrong show.
Wrong show. Velocity.
Yeah, velocity.
And I'm in the gorilla position. And Vince, I had been there and I had done enough dark matches that, I knew Vince never came up for the dark matches. He would always wait back wherever in his office or whatever. And then when the show was about to start...
Steak.
What's that?
Eating his nice steak.
Eating his steak with ketchup on it. And he would just sit back in his office until the show was about to start. Then he would come out and he would sit at gorilla position, put on his headphones, and away the show would go. As I'm warming up for my dark match, it wasn't even going to be on TV at all. It wasn't even going to be a velocity match. I saw Vince walk up, and he was going to sit at gorilla. And 2 minutes later, Dave Lagana walked up and said, just want you to know that this is no longer a dark match. This is a velocity match. And the finish has changed. You're going over. You're going to win the match. We have to come up with a finisher for you. And he stuck out his hand and he said, welcome to the show. He's like, welcome. I was like, okay. And I was nervous, but at the same time, I had done it for so long, and I had been told no for so long, or heard nothing at all, which is worse than being told no,
right,
in my opinion, that I was just like, screw it. I'm going to go out there, and this is my fucking show.
What finisher did you use?
So they said, Fit Finley was our agent.
Fit Finley he was in your
WrestleMania.
Yeah, well,
he's a
talk about
genius
that later.
too. Yeah. He's a legit genius from everything I heard.
I love Fit Finley.
Okay, that's making sure we're all on the
Finley
same
is
page.
one of my favorite human beings on planet Earth.
Okay, your finisher in your first match.
So I said, so on the Indies, I had, and the first guy I ever did this with was Austin Aries on an Ian Rotten show in
IWA
Indiana,
Mid-South, right?
IWA Mid-South. It was the Ted Petty Invitational Tournament, 2003
Big thing, yeah.
or whatever.
Sure, it's on YouTube.
2002, 2003. And I had done the Finley roll off the second rope. And I remember I used to do the Finley roll standing in the ring, and I was like, it'd be freaking cool if you could do it off the top rope or off the second rope at least. The guy goes up for something, and you stop him and catch him on your shoulders and hit them with the...
Or off a ladder with
the roll, or
with
a midget on your shoulders.
Little person.
Yeah. Hey, you know what?
Dylan
I'll tell you
won't
what.
care.
I'll call
won't care.
Dylan right now. I'll get him on the phone, and he'll tell you himself that he prefers to be called
I know
midget.
he does, yeah.
So,
we got off track. What was the finisher in
well,
your first move?
They said, like, what's your finisher? And I said, I do a Finley roll off the second rope. And it was, I said this to Finley. And he's like, huh? He kind of like raised his eyebrows like, fuck, that's tough, that's stiff. And I knew that I could take care. And Funaki was super cool with it, which is interesting because I worked Funaki in that match, and then I was Mr. Anderson, and then I worked Funaki in my very first actual SmackDown match. But anyway, so they decided that was the deal. I went out, did the match. I came back through the curtain, and they said, I remember walking through the curtain, and Arn Anderson and Johnny Ace came up to me and said, like, congratulations, kid, you got yourself a job. So, like, the way that I went on and presented myself in that first Velocity match got me my job with WWE ultimately, and got me the respect. And, like, Vince was sitting right there, and Vince said something to the effect of, like, where's this guy been? I generally don't like to toot my own horn. I'm just, that's what was told to me at the time. Like, and it was a good feeling because I had worked for 6 years at busting my butt, and going out there and knowing that I can't screw up. It's live wrestling. Just take what's yours. That's what I always tell people when they come into the wrestling business, when it's their opportunity to be in those positions where they're an enhancement talent yes, you're an enhancement talent. You're there to make the other person look good. But when it's your turn, you need to take what's yours. Mm-hmm. And you need to say, it's okay to apologize to a guy in the locker room for doing something that might piss you off. You mush a guy in the face, like, sorry. That was just me being in the moment. Anyway, I know I got off the track there, but so, yeah, that's where the whole Mr. Anderson thing came, the announcing thing came from. And then a few weeks later, Dave Lagana decided, like, hey, we should drop the mic down from the ceiling. And I was like, oh, that's like the missing piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So
you ended up, your finisher, your Finley roll, was it Kenton Bomb? Is that what you called it?
Actually, at first they called it the Lambeau Leap, and then
right.
the Packers organization, I think, reached out to him and said, no more of that. And then they called it the Polar Plunge or something like that.
That's right. It was something different. And I didn't see him use it on the Indies in a long time, so I used it, I don't know, a couple of years ago.
Son of a bitch.
I did. From the second hook. But the thing is, when I impacted them down, like the spring of the ring, which again is not soft, but it catapulted me to land on my feet. And I was like, this is fucking cool. Like, if I can do this every time I land on my feet, it's awesome. Yeah. It doesn't happen every time. But it was awesome. So before WWE, you were obviously on the Indies. That's where I met you. Did you start wrestling in 1999? 99. Yep. Signed in 2005. So you busted your nuts on the indie scene for 6 years. I worked with you, obviously, on Wisconsin shows. You worked Minnesota shows, MPW. I mean, I can name Steel Domain. Who was Mike Mercury? Obviously, trained you.
Yeah, Mike Mercury and Eric Hammer.
Yes, yeah, and so those guys kind of laid, and they're old school mentality guys in the business, which was good. You know, coming up on that.
Which I don't mean to cut you off, but I just want to say, like, I was lucky because at the time there were all kinds of indie promoters out there who were total goofs. And there still are today that take your money, that have worked. Maybe, they've done a dark match with WWE. And I'm not saying that, like, in order to be knowledgeable in this business, you have to have been to the dance, because there are plenty of people out there who were never have never experienced WWE or WCW or TNA or whatever, ECW, who know what they're talking about, who are good. But there were these guys who would do one thing, and then they think, well, that means that I can train people. And they really don't understand the business. They don't understand psychology.
Like, how'd you find these guys, by the way?
I just happened to...
Did Mike now runs a promotion? Does he? Or is he associated with 3TW? Yeah,
3TW.
Right? Okay. Was he running a promotion?
Triple Threat Wrestling.
Right. Was he running a promotion back then, too?
So... I was at a party one night, probably 99 sometime.
Sprite and Coca-Cola.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah, just Sprite and Coca-Cola, because I was only 20 at the time. So. I had the wrestling at the time was so popular. Stone Cold was huge. The Rock had just started taking off.
And Stone Cold was your guy, right?
He was the guy that I remember. My buddy would always wear these wrestling shirts, and I would always give him a hard time. I'm like, what are you watching that garbage for? It's a bunch of dudes rolling around in the ring wearing tights. Like, what are you watching? What is this? They're wearing baby oil? Like,
you were that guy.
A bunch of bag shavers, And he's just like, yeah, but you don't understand. It's this and it's that, and it's just entertainment. And so one night, I was over at his house. We were playing cards and drinking beer and having a good time, or we were drinking non-alcoholic beer.
Correct. O'Doul's.
Cheap one. Sharps.
Yeah, that's right there.
And he said, we're watching wrestling tonight. And I said, no, we're not. And he said, yes, we are.
Fuck you,
and it's my fucking house, we're watching wrestling. So we watched wrestling. And he's like, dude, I'm telling you, when you see this fucking guy come out, Stone Cold Steve Austin, I can't even explain. Just watch. So I was like, jaded. No, this is gay. This is stupid. Gay, and not meaning homosexual in the colloquial sense.
Right.
Words have no meaning. Meaning is up to the user.
You heard it here first.
That's actually good too. Yeah, it's good.
So,
You heard the glass break.
I heard the glass break, and I saw this black pickup truck drive down to the ring with this bald-headed son of a bitch, and he had a 6-pack of beer on his lap, and he flipped the camera, "Get the hell out of my way!" And I was like, that guy's actually pretty cool. Like, I grew up in a small
That
town.
guy looks like the guy I want to
Right. Well, just like, I know these guys. I know guys that drive around and pick up trucks with 6-packs of beer on their laps. And
Don't we all?
That's what we call
flip
it Wednesday
people
night.
off. Yeah. So,
Booze cruising.
and that was the big thing, right? Like, Stone Cold was a blue-collar guy that wanted to beat up his boss. I mean, he will talk differently about it. I've heard him talk differently about it. But, like, at its basic level, that's what that was. And it was relatable. And it was something that you could wrap your mind around and appreciate. And have sympathy for when he was down in his luck in those circumstances, like when Vince was really sticking it to him, you thought like, I just want him to like rally up and beat the shit out of his boss. Anyway, I honed in on that particular aspect, and then the next week, my roommate at the time happened to be a big wrestling fan. And so he had no problem with me tuning in to watching wrestling. So I watched wrestling the next week, and then the next week. And then pretty soon I went from just enjoying and, appreciating Stone Cold Steve Austin to appreciating Undertaker and The Rock and Kane and Funaki and everybody. Steve Blackman at the time. And I started to love the wrestling business. So anyway, fast forward, I'm at a party. We're all talking about wrestling because wrestling was so popular at the time. It was on Austin's on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. It had become like, you talk to Bully Ray and he says like they were getting rock star treatment everywhere they went, rolling out the red carpet. I mean, people were freaking crazy about wrestling. And I happened to be at a party and a guy was like, you can go to wrestling school and learn how to do all these moves and stuff like that. And I was like, what? I didn't even think of I never even thought, how do these guys do this? I don't know. I just never thought about it. And then I left the party early that night, which is unlike me. Went home and I went on whatever it was, AOL.com at the time.
Right. Yeah. Web TV, AOL, whatever.
I don't even know what the hell the search engine. There was no Google or anything like that. Whatever it was, I searched wrestling schools. And I found one in Chicago, and I assumed that since I lived in Green Bay at the time...
Was that Steel Domain?
No, it was ACW.
Okay.
Ended up being ACW, and there was a bunch of other little indie promotions around there at the time. Steel Domain was out of Minnesota.
Okay, but I know there was Steel Domain Academy in Chicago, right? So
it was in Chicago, yeah. But it was North American Wrestling Federation. Okay. And it was NAWF, Rock and Randy. And I called that. I happened to find that promotion, and I said, like, if I have to travel there every weekend and sleep in my car, whatever, I'll do it. I'll go to wrestling school. I'll learn how to do this. And I hadn't read Mick Foley's book. Mick Foley's book hadn't come out at the time. None of that stuff. That was my mindset. Like, I'm going to do this. This is something I want to do. And so...
And this was 20-year-old Ken Anderson.
20-year-old Ken Anderson, yeah.
Were you...
18
an
years.
athlete, football player, all this kind of stuff? Were you in really good shape before you went, or were you just shooting from the hip at that point?
I was in average shape. I had started working out maybe 2 years before that with the same guy that introduced me to pro wrestling in the first place. Like, he had taken me to the gym and like introduced me to bodybuilding and working out. And so it was that sort of scenario. And I just said, like, this is what I'm going to do. And so I called Rock and Randy. I left a message on his answering machine. I said, like, I'm Ken Anderson. I live in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, which is near Green Bay. And I said, I'd like to come to wrestling school. And a couple days later, I got a phone call from a guy in Green Bay who was Mike Krause, right. Mike Mercury, who said, look, I got your number from Rock and Randy, who runs a school in Chicago, but knew that Mike was going to start a school in Green Bay, and said, here, this guy. And to hear him tell the story is kind of funny, because he says, like, looking back on it, he says, Rock and Randy called him up one day and said, hey, I got this prick in Two Rivers. He says he wants to be a wrestler.
Ken Anderson was that prick.
Yeah.
You were the guy.
No wonder why Sean Devari was a prick to me.
No, he's just a prick in general. Okay, he can't help it. He can't help himself. But he said, I got this prick in Two Rivers. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give him to you since he's closer to you. Which Two Rivers was only 30 minutes from Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Two Rivers was 3 hours from Chicago. He said, I'll give this prick to you. If he makes it, I'm going to use him, and I'm going to call him Two Rivers Jack. Which I don't know what that means to this day. There was a gay wrestler back in the 50s. That was one thing about Rockin' Randy was like he liked to rib guys just to entertain himself. A lot of times like he would have like really talented wrestlers that would wrestle on his show, but he would give them like the stupidest gimmicks just to entertain himself, like the Wisconsin Chicken. I don't know how many times I wrestled as the Wisconsin Chicken for Rockin' Randy and had to go out and do the whole the chicken dance.
Yeah, that's.
But whatever, you know. And I did it with pride, and I loved it. It was fun to me at the time, and I considered it as part of paying my dues. But so yeah, he goes, if the prick makes it, I'll call him Two Rivers Jack. So. He said, I'd like you to come in, do a tryout. I did the tryout. I loved it. I went to lunch with Eric and Mike, and they said, you did really well. We'd like you to continue. So, yeah, I trained for 9 months, had my first match, and then I wrestled. First night I wrestled, I sold so many tickets. I sold probably 350 to 400 tickets my first night. I went around to, like, my hometown, all the surrounding communities. I hung flyers. I called everybody that I knew, family members, whatever, and I told them like invite 10 people that you know. It was a big deal.
Like selling prom tickets, pretty much.
Yeah.
Except for they weren't getting laid after the show.
Yeah.
In Two Rivers, we don't know for sure.
I can't remember if I did or not. I don't know. Probably not. But I sold a bunch of tickets for that show. Then the next night...
Do you remember who you wrestled your first match with?
Derek St. Holmes Esquire.
Did you really?
Yeah.
God damn.
Yeah.
And he's still around, too.
He hit me with his Tome of Wisdom.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Dino Bambino came out at the end of the match and like hit me over the head with the tome or threw the book to Derek. Derek hit me with the book. Yeah. And... yeah, it was my first match. It was like... I was so nervous for 3 weeks before the match. That's literally all I could think about. And I called Derek like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, my name's Ken Anderson, and we're going to be wrestling each other, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to talk some stuff over and like figure out what we were going to do in our match. And he just sort of chuckled and he said, we'll be okay. We'll just kind of talk about it the day of. Like, let's just do that. Because for those of you who don't know, that's generally what happens. Is like you don't find out A, who you're wrestling, or B, what you're doing in said match until the day of the show, and generally a couple hours before the show. And so he was just like, we'll be okay. We'll be fine. And but I was just so nervous. Anyway, looking back on it, I've seen videotape of the match since.
Were you awesome?
Oh, it was terrible. I was so bad. It was.
In pro wrestling, they refer to that as the drizzling shits, and I'm sure it's probably pretty close to that.
Might have been, at least the drizzling shits, possibly an abortion. Probably
neither one is good.
No, it was terrible.
It's great watching some of your first matches. Like, Jesus, who's this kid? Who's this guy?
The first match, the last match that I had before I went to WWE, I watched it and I was like, what the frick was I thinking?
Who'd you work before you got signed?
Shane Hills.
Okay.
Hillbilly Hills.
Yeah.
Was the last guy that I worked in. I'm not talking about from his standpoint, but like from things that I did.
Was that Wisconsin?
Yeah, it was in Green Bay.
Yeah.
Stupid stuff.
So I know you and Sean went around and you guys were enhancement guys and you guys did the same. And it's fun. Yeah. And it's funny because like me and Sean's younger brother, Arya, and another guy in the area, Craven, did the same thing. Like we sat with Regal for a day, and then on Tuesday at the Target Center, an empty Target Center with like 17,000 empty seats, and the boys are on the ring. And I think you guys will do something similar to this probably too. You do your quote-unquote tryout match or a match in front of Regal, or I'm not sure who was at the time. But to me, that was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done, because I'm used to feeding off crowd reaction. There's nobody there. The ring is 2 foot bigger on each side than I'm used to. You got these WWE superstars around the ring. And it's like, okay, it's now or never type of a thing. But in your circumstance, was that something similar to where they had you, all right, get in the ring with you and you, get in there, do your thing, and then they kind of judge your character off of that?
So for years and years, I did tryouts for 6 years before I was told nothing at all before I was told anything. And that was it. You would go, you would get to the building, and you would almost immediately, like, I remember a few times we would go and eat catering real quick. You would try to be in and out and not try to piss anybody off,
right, or
be too assuming. And we would eat catering really quickly, and then we would go get our stuff on, our wrestling gear, which at the time, you just wear knee pads, boots, elbow pads, and a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. You're not wearing like full, you're not oiled up and wearing little tights or whatever.
Which we were. We had to be.
Really?
Yeah.
But you would just get ready, and you go stand by the ring, and you just expect that at some point you were going to get in the ring and be able to at least try to wrestle in front of your peers, people that you wanted to hire you. And I did that for years and years and years. And I remember at times getting in there and not really knowing how to just call stuff on the fly, and being put in that position, and you would embarrass yourself. And I remember, like, at one point being in the ring with somebody, and it was just terrible, and I didn't know what to do. And Bill DeMott said, "Get the fuck out of the ring.
Yeah,
like, you're terrible. Like, you come here and you got to know how to work. You got to learn how to work. You got to be able to just call stuff on the fly." And so for me, that was motivational. It was like, next time I'm going to come here, I'm going to know how to call some stuff on the fly. And so the next time you'd come and you'd do the same thing, and but for years and years and years, I would just do that scenario where you would just get there, you would wrestle a little bit during the day, and they would put you in these matches. Every once in a while, you'd get a dark match. I was fortunate enough that I got a lot of dark matches when I was there. I did probably 10 or 12 before I got hired. And you're only getting these once every 6 months or so.
Yeah.
It's not like they're happening every month. And then one time, so Davari called me one day. Davari and I came up together.
Mm-hmm.
We became best friends. Wrestled each other all over the place. We sort of, I would get him booked in places, and he would get me booked in places. And it was like, we will come and we'll wrestle each other, and we travel together, and yada, yada, yada. So one day, I'm at Target visiting my girlfriend at the time, and Davari calls me and says, "Hey, dude, I just want you to know, you're the first guy I'm calling to let you know that Dr. Tom Pritchard just called me and said, like, you're hired. I'm hiring you." And
did your girlfriend live at Target?
She worked there. She worked there.
Gotcha. I got you.
I was visiting her. Yeah. So I was visiting her. Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Nope.
I suppose I should.
There's worse places.
I suppose that I should have
Girlfriend
mentioned that. So yeah, she was working at Target. I was visiting her at work, and Davari called me, took a walk. He's like, "I got hired. I'm going to OVW, yada, yada, yada." I remember at the time, my girlfriend, when I went up to her and I told her, I said, "Hey, Davari," she knew this was my best friend. Like, Davari just called me and told me he got hired. And she looked at me, and she got these, like, puppy dog doe eyes, and she was like, are you okay? And I said, "What do you mean, am I okay?" She's like, "Well, I know that you've been working at this for a really long time, and, he got hired before you did. Are you okay?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah, I'm okay. My fucking best friend just got hired by the company that he's been he's been busting his ass for. Like, fuck me." That's not what I'm thinking. My friend just got his dream job. Yes, I'm happy. I'm okay. And it was just like, at that moment, this is a side note, but at that moment I was like, this girl's you know.
If you're out there,
Not the girl's going to be.
She's going to be a really good ex-girlfriend one day.
Yes.
We've all had them.
This is a real gem that I got on my hands right now. And anyway, so fast forward a few months. Davari's been there. Now he's on TV. He's doing the Muhammad Hassan, Khazro Davari thing.
And this is 2003?
it was 2004. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I go. Davari was actually the guy that called me and said, "Hey, Dreamer needs some local talent for this show in, I think it was like Oklahoma. It was some kind of far out of the way. It wasn't near Wisconsin where I was living at the time. I was living in Green Bay. He was like, look, these shows are kind of far away, but if you can make him there, do it."
Right.
And because Tommy Dreamer had taken over for talent relations. He had taken over from Tom Pritchard, and Davari happened to be good friends with Tommy, and Tommy would call him from time to time and say, like, "Hey, I need local talent for said, this is your market, the Midwest. I figure you know all the indie talent here. Who do you suggest?" And he said, like, Mitch Paradise and Ken Anderson and Lenny Lane. Those are the guys. And so anyway, I ended up going, and we're standing outside the ring. Davari had been there for a while. He knew what they were looking for. He knew the kinds of things that they didn't like when indie talent came in. And I happened to be standing right next to Davari, and we were all the indie talent were standing around the ring, middle of the day, and Fit Finley came out, Arn Anderson came out, and they were sort of running us through the ringer. And Fit just pointed at me and pointed at Davari and said, you get in the ring, go.
Luck of the draw right there.
And I was like, we had wrestled each other so many times at that point. We had wrestled each other 100 times at least on independent shows. We had so much stuff in the tank, and then Davari was like, dude, I know what they're looking for. Just listen to me here. And it was just funny because Davari's way younger than I am.
Right, yeah.
Like when I met him, I was 25, 26, and he was 17 or something like that.
Yeah, he was 19 and he got kicked out of the casino we were at.
Doesn't surprise me because he's a prick. So I just said, yeah, whatever, man, I'll listen to you. So we went in the ring, and he called most of everything, and I inserted things that were appropriate when I just worried about my stuff and selling and making sure that when it was my turn to shine, I was, taking my time with everything. And I remember, Arn Anderson came up to me the next day and said, like, kid, I just want you to know that I saw that match with you and that fucking Taliban kid, and it was a hell of a match you guys had, and I'm telling you right now, and he tried to get me a match that day in front of Johnny Ace, and he was like, I'm gonna try to get you a match. And then it didn't work out, but he said to me, he's like, the next time we're hiring, I'm gonna try to get you a job. And he's like, I don't tell it to everybody. He's like, and I can't promise you anything, but the next time there's a round of hiring, I'm gonna try to get you a job. So we started out talking about the dark matches, right? Like
Something like that.
Something like that, like the whole scenario of
I'm working the indies,
working
Mike Mercury.
the indies, and but it was like, yes, I did all those dark matches, and I did all the where you'd show up and you would just try to work out in the ring, and for whatever reason, luck of the draw, I happened to get paired up with my best friend in the business, Davari, and we were able to have a good match. And so, luckily, and they say, like, luck is where preparation and something else, kind of meet.
So we're going to take a break in a second, but before we do that, one quick question for you. You said you got stiffed on a payday recently.
Yeah.
Stiffed on a payday before signing with WWE, or did this other second episode happen after?
This just happened a few weeks ago. Like
that one did, right?
A couple months ago.
But you said it happened to you twice, right?
Well, yeah, way before I signed with WWE.
Which happened. I mean, I've had that happen to me a couple times, and I mean,
Yeah, we worked a show in Iron Mountain, Michigan.
Okay.
At a high school, there was like 3,000 people in attendance, which at the time,
$3,000 is awesome. Yeah,
3,000 people for any show is pretty awesome. I've been on WWE shows that didn't have 3,000 people in attendance. So yeah, 3,000 people in attendance. You would think that the promoter would have had the funds to at least pay his guys. I mean, I was only making $50 at the time, $50 or
you don't get rich in this business.
Yeah,
you don't
you
get
do it
rich
because you love it.
Right.
Well, you can get rich.
Yes.
If you play your cards correctly. But yeah, at that level, when you're just trying to make it and just trying to have fun. Doing it because you love the business. But anyway, this guy should have had the funds to pay us. When it came time, the main event rolled around and the promoter skated, and so we all jumped over. It was Eric Hammers, myself. It was Eric Hammers, Hillbilly Hills, who's a big dude. Mm-hmm. Rob Norwood, who's a big dude. And I went over to this guy's, and Cujo, who's a big dude,
very big dude, yes.
Went over to this guy's trailer, and basically one guy, we assumed that he had like a shotgun behind the door, so Hillbilly stood in front of the door, and we all sort of kind of surrounded this guy and said, "You're gonna fucking pay us," and he ended up paying us our $50, so we could go sleep at a Roach Motel.
When you're good at something, don't do it for free, even if you have to go get it. So, all right, let's take a quick break. Come back. We'll dive into more WWE stuff here in just a second.
I have voices in my head. They counsel me. They understand. They talk to me.
What up, everybody? It's Renny D, the host of The Pencil, a professional wrestling podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, PodBean, and YouTube. Each and every week, I do my best to bring you exciting guests to look inside the world of professional wrestling. I'll use my 11 years experience in professional wrestling to look at the product on TV, as well as dissect the news and rumors. Follow us on Twitter @Pencil Podcast.
What's up, guys and girls? This is the American Psycho, and you're listening to The Pencil with Renny D and Dirty.
Hey, Dave, what do you get when an atheist and a Christian start a podcast?
I don't know, Ken. What do you get when a Christian and an atheist start a podcast?
I don't know. You're the freaking comedian. I figured you'd have some kind of joke or something.
Right. Hi, I'm David Vox Mullen.
And I'm Mr. Anderson.
Seriously?
Wait for it. Just wait for it. Anderson.
And we're the hosts of Push the Button on the DVM Podcast Empire.
It's a show where we discuss religion, politics, and sex. All that stuff that we're not supposed to talk about.
I am a Christian.
And I'm an ordained minister with the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
I think that's code for he's an atheist.
And together, we tackle any and every hot-button issue that the world is scared to talk about.
Yeah, we're not afraid of the truth.
Yeah, we're not afraid to piss people off.
We're not afraid to push the button.
So find us on iTunes.
Or simply visit us online at dvmpe.com. And God willing, you'll come back for more.
Yeah, God willing. That's you took the words right out of my mouth, Dave.
So hopefully you're still with us, but if you are, obviously, I would assume they would be. You just heard a cool little commercial that outside of pro wrestling, you try to diversify what you do in life, and one thing that you do is a controversial podcast, some might say. Push the button.
Yeah.
iTunes. There's a website. There's a Twitter. Fill us in. What is Push the Button, and why did you start it? And why are you so interested in sharing your point of view with the world?
So, I've always been sort of opinionated about certain things.
No,
whether
you
it
don't
comes
say.
to the wrestling world or anything else, politics. And just in the last few years, more so religion, because I've had people in my life who are very religious, including my wife. My wife is a Christian, born-again Christian, runs a Christian business, sweetpraises.com, if anybody's interested.
And what do they do?
she sells home decor.
Okay.
Things like that. Pictures, paintings, knickknacks, things like that. She felt that there was this void when she would go to buy these kinds of things at stores. She felt like everything that she'd come into contact with was something that you would see in your great-great-grandmother's house. Mm-hmm. That was crappy plastic garbage, and she wanted something that was a little more contemporary, so she started this business. But my family members, friends, all Christians, were always telling me, like, you need to, this is part of your life that's missing. This is very important. And to most people, 93% of Americans consider themselves to be Christians. It's just a fact. And many more consider themselves, we have all kinds of religions. It's a melting pot, right? We have Islam, we have Buddhism, all kinds of just people that claim to be spiritual, yada, yada, yada. So a large majority of our population are religious. And so I started looking into it and realized that I had a lot of questions. And I had a lot of what I thought were legitimate questions. And when I raised these questions to these people who had no problem asserting themselves to me, when I raised these questions, they would get upset about it and offended. And I just thought, like, that's a really crappy way to go about life. We should be open to changing our opinions from time to time and thinking about things rationally and logically, and I don't see any problem with it. So anyway, it was born out of a sort of a frustration that I couldn't have these discussions with anybody around me, friends, family, you name it, without getting heated, without getting emotional. And I happened to be at a convention doing a signing, and I ran into David Voxmullen, who is a comedian and a guy who runs a podcast empire, dvmpe.com. And I happened to... It was funny because I was walking by the booth. I had taken a break from doing the signing, and I was walking around just enjoying... Because I love Comic-Cons. They're fantastic. Nobody's ever been to a Comic-Con. You gotta go.
You get a wide variety of people.
Yes. And I happened to be walking by his booth, and I looked and I saw, and I had been thinking, because I had heard Cabana's podcast. When I heard Cabana's podcast, I was like, that's brilliant. It's fantastic. But he's got the wrestling angle covered. And then Austin started doing his podcast, and Jericho and Shane Helms had already been doing his podcast. Now Jim Ross does a podcast. Mm-hmm. Now this guy does a podcast. Now you do a podcast.
Now we do a podcast.
No, and it's great. But for me, I was like, I'd like to do this. This is something that's interesting to me. That's outside of wrestling business. I'd like to talk about that. And I was always just sort of hesitant about it because these are controversial subjects. If I bring this up on television, on an episode of Impact, I'm going to lose 50% of my viewership right away, right? If I say that if you say, like, if you're voting for the Republican candidate, well, all your Democratic candidate or all your Democratic people are going to
tune you out.
Right. So that was always sort of my reservations. And I ended up, I saw David, he saw me, and he happened to be a wrestling fan, so we sort of saw each other at the same exact moment. It was just weird and kind of, weird sounding, but we locked eyes, and
it was romantic.
It was, we ran at each other, and some music played in the background, and we embraced each other. And I just said, "Hey, I've been thinking about doing a podcast," and he just sort of, I could see the eyes sort of glaze over, like, oh boy, here we go. A wrestling podcast, another wrestler that wants to do a wrestling podcast. And I said, but I don't want to talk about wrestling. I want to talk about other things. And he was like, what? What are you talking about? And I said, well, I'd like to, I'm an atheist. I'm a non-believer. I'd like to talk about religion. I'd like to talk about politics. And he was like, I'm a Christian. But these are topics that, and some of the stuff that we started talking about, he was like, this is stuff that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. And so we exchanged information, and it took me about 3 or 4 weeks before I finally called him, because I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. It's touchy. And I finally called him and said, look, like, let's think about this. And he said, let's do it. And within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we started the podcast. So.
And it's been going on for how long now?
7 or 8 months.
Perfect.
Yeah. And we've touched on subjects from the episode that we just did about the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
The 10 Commandments that we're all familiar with, or that most people are familiar with, or people think they're familiar with. Most people, like, if you ask them, are you a Christian? Yes. Are the 10 Commandments important? Yes. They are the basis for our laws in this country. Tell me the 10 Commandments.
And we said we could name 2 or 3.
4,
right.
3?
Three
Most
or
people
four?
can't name many. And the 10 Commandments that you're familiar with, or that you think you're familiar with, or, and if somebody comes along and says, like, well, here they are, you go, yeah, here they are. Don't worship false idols, observe the Sabbath and keep it holy, don't take the Lord's name in vain, don't kill people, don't murder, don't covet, all this other stuff, right? Oh, yeah, those are the 10 Commandments. Well, those aren't the actual 10 Commandments, and people don't know that. And what I found really odd, to say the least, and I'm being sort of flip and sort of mild, that people don't tend to read their holy books. Like, people who say they're Christians have never read the Bible. They just take the word of the preacher that tells them on Sunday. And that preacher just cherry picks certain verses out of the Bible and says, like, be kind to others. Treat others as you would expect them to treat you. These kinds of things. And ignore passages like stone children to death when they talk back to you.
I was going to say, it's pretty violent.
I mean, you read the Old Testament. People always say, like, the Quran in Islam is the most violent religion in the world, and that the Quran is just this vitriolic book of just death and torture and suffering. The Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, is some of the worst stuff you'll ever read in your life. It's just awful. God kills everybody in a
It's not pleasant.
drowning death. He kills people for talking for like the Jews are walking around the desert for 40 years, and they just have the audacity to ask him, like, instead of eating this flavorless, odorless, tasteless substance, can we possibly have some meat? And he says, I'll fucking give you meat. And he makes him eat. He like gifts them with these infected birds, and they eat the birds thinking, like, oh, we finally got some meat, and the birds give them the plague, and they all fucking die a horrible death. And like, it's just death after death. And everybody, you have to cut off, you have to mutilate your genitals, you have to cut off your foreskin in order, like, hey, I created you. You're made in my image. I fucked up on the penis. Like, you gotta cut that little piece of skin off around your fucking head of your cock in order to appease me, or we just can't go on anymore. And at one point, there's a guy who literally, like, there's like a story in the Bible where there's a guy that has a mountain of foreskins that he's standing on top of.
How dare he?
This kind of stuff. Like people don't know these things. People
I didn't know that
about the Bible. Like they
Foreskin
don't know
Mountain.
that Lot, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. God destroyed this city because they were so, they were a bunch of homosexuals, and they were having sex with each other, and they were just partying and being crazy. Come to find out that the holiest, the guy who was spared in the end ended up giving up his daughters. Like these angels come to Lot's house, and he gives them like refuge in his house. He says, "Come into my house. I'll protect you." And all these like marauders come to the house, knock on the door, and says, like, "We saw those angels come in there. We want to come in there and we want to have sex with them. We want to fuck them. We want to fuck those angels, those male angels." And Lot says, "Please, whatever you do, don't have sex with the male angels. I'll tell you what, my daughters are virgins. have sex with my daughters.
Oh. What door is this?
Totally. Hey. They're virgins. They're virgins, and they're my daughters. They're women. They're fucking chattel. So just, you can do whatever you want to them, but whatever you do, don't have sex with the men. And so God says, this is the most righteous dude in the whole planet. I'm going to spare this guy. So this is the kind of stuff that people just don't know. And that's sort of my frustration. It's sort of the catalyst for me doing my podcast. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off, and I'm sure we lost a bunch of people.
If that podcast can be as much fun as the last 4.5 minutes listening to you talk about it was, I mean, I'm sold.
I just want that address.
I just want that address of whoever that dad was that's giving up his daughter.
Please, have my daughters, I
haven't met a dad like that.
And the thing that just drives me insane is the equivocation that people will go through, the acrobatics that people will go to explain that shit away. Like, oh, well, at this time, it was okay for, like slavery, the issue of slavery. In the Bible, it tells you clearly, like, you can own slaves. If you buy a slave, you only can own them for 6 years. But if you give a slave a wife, and then through that marriage or union, they end up having kids, after the 6 years, the slave can go free, but the wife and kids are yours. So it's like they trick people into, like, if it was you, and you were a slave, and after the first year, you ended up, like, your master gave you a wife, and then you had these beautiful children.
Well, that's not. They wouldn't be beautiful if it's a dirt kid.
Depending on the woman. Depending on the woman. I understand. I'm following.
They got her genes. You know what I'm saying?
I follow.
And at the end of that scenario, you have these beautiful kids, and then your master says, like, "Oh, you can go free." But your wife and kids, they're mine. Or hey, you don't have to go. You could stay with me. But what would you do? I would hope that in that scenario, I would stay and stay with my family.
Of course.
So they figure out there's a way that they can there's a loophole as to how you can be a slave for life. And but people will say, well, at that time, slavery was acceptable, and because it was indentured servitude and blah 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 blah. Well, no, because you're told how you can. If you beat your slave, as long as if he dies after 3 days, you're cool. But or you're not cool if he gets up after a day or two. Like, you beat him down so badly that he's fucking can't get on his feet for 2 or 3 days, you're cool. As long as he can get on his feet after 2 or 3 days, then you're okay. Like, that stuff to me is not indentured servitude. Anyway, I'm like getting way off topic here.
Push the button podcast.
Push the button.
Push the button. Yeah, we push people's buttons. And,
push the button podcast.
And the thing is like, here's the thing. I maintain that I can always be wrong, and I might be wrong. I might be wrong about a lot of things. But I believe that we should be able to have a discussion about it and
change your opinion accordingly.
If you can present me with new evidence, I will definitely change my opinion. And it's happened to me all the time. I used to be for the death penalty, and now in most scenarios, I'm against the death penalty.
Which you're open-minded towards different ideas, obviously, you mentioned before. So
yeah.
Which is good. I mean, you present your case and then give me a rebuttal.
Yeah.
And if it makes sense, I'll look into it.
Yeah.
And go from there, which is good. I mean, instead of saying, this is how it is, fuck you, on to the next thing. So that's a good thing about the podcast is, like, if you guys have opinions to their podcast, tweet them, send them a message, whatever. I mean, you guys will look into it. I mean, you guys want to make sure that it's what you're reporting or what you're saying is most accurate, is, I guess, what your interpretation is or what the evidence shows. So, again, Push the Button podcast.
Yep.
And
it's
website again?
Stitcher, iTunes, or you can go directly to dvmpe.com. And amongst the cornucopia of other podcasts that you'll find there, you will find Push the Button.
Awesome. And now I'm trying to segue. I'm going to try to segue. Yeah. It might be a loose one, but we talk about Christians and Christianity. And I'm going to try to tie it into a wrestler.
So we're going to talk about Christian?
We could talk about Christian.
Captain Charisma?
I got a funny story about Christian.
What do we got? If
we want to talk about Captain Charisma, I'm in.
So let's talk about Christian, because this is a funny story. It's one of my favorite stories. I had just started in WWE. I had been there for a few months. Captain Charisma was on top, working with Booker T on all the house shows. So I started on SmackDown. And
was Paul Heyman running SmackDown when you were there yet?
No,
okay,
he wasn't. He was at OVW.
Gotcha.
At the time. And never, from the time that I was there, he had never.
Okay.
He never really ran SmackDown at all, or even ECW. When ECW started up, unfortunately, Paul had a little bit of say, but not nearly. Vince never said like, "Here are the reins. Here you go. This is your pony." So anyway, working the house shows, and Christian's working on top with Booker T, and houses weren't doing necessarily so well. The buildings were half full. We go into a building that held 10,000, we would drop 5,000, 4,000, something like that. They would tarp off half the building, whatever. I remember one night after the match, Christian was in the locker room, and I just went up and I said, like, "Hey man, thanks for the house." Meaning, like, thank you for drawing all the people here. And he said, "Thanks." And then he sort of turned away, and then he had that look in his eye, and he like turned back, and he goes, "Come here for a second." He goes, "What did you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, I'm new. They don't really know who I am. They're here to see you. When they come, they're coming to pay to see you, and I'm thanking you for putting food on my family's table." He said, "Oh, okay. All right, that's cool. But just in the future, just so you know, did you happen to see the house tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I sort of, start catching on like what he's throwing down, and he's like, "If you noticed, the building was about half empty tonight. So in the future, when you say that to somebody, they might take it the wrong way that you're insulting them." And so it's become kind of a joke where, like, if it's a shitty house, the guy on top will generally say, like, "Guys are welcome.
Right.
Welcome to the house." Which, happened a lot the last summer. But
I got a lot of stories on the cover with you, and just we'll touch on certain. You had a great WWE career, 2005 to 2009. 4 years. You've said it in your interviews. You had a rocket ship tied to your ass. You were the next Stone Cold, some said. I mean, literally, I've been wrestling since I've been 16 years old, so that was 2003. I fell out of love, not love, but I stopped kind of watching it for quite a while, and part of the reason I was still watching it was you were very entertaining on TV, and obviously, again, hey, I know this guy, like, I worked shows with him, but some of the other stuff was, Rock was leaving, Austin was leaving, all these Attitude Era guys were leaving. You got a chance, to kind of take the ball and carry WWTV for a while. You had, I don't know if it's a program, but you've touched on this before, the Eddie Guerrero. Yeah. You were the last televised match with Eddie. Mm-hmm. Every interview I've heard, every podcast, Chris Jericho's books, paint Eddie to be this unbelievable worker, unbelievable person, which I believe he is. How did that news hit you? I'm not sure how well you knew Eddie, but I know you had the last match with him, and I think you've been quoted saying it was an unfortunate honor to work him. Mm-hmm. Did you know him well?
So, Eddie was one of those guys. When I first got to WWE, I was on SmackDown, and I've always said, like, SmackDown was, there were so many guys over there who had been to the mountaintop. They were on the mountaintop, and they were throwing rope ladders down the sides of the mountain. They were throwing anything that they could, saying, like, holding their arm out, saying, like, I had Undertaker, I had Batista, Chris Benoit, Eddie, Kane, Fit Finlay, all these guys that were, Booker T, Rey Mysterio, all these guys were like, look, we're up here. The air is nice up here. There's room for more people up here. Come join us. And they would try to help you out. And Eddie was one of those guys. And so he took a genuine, whenever there was somebody there who he any of those guys that I just mentioned, who those guys saw, like, this guy loves the business, he respects the business, he respects those that came before him, and they want to get better, they would throw that rope ladder around. And, I happen to be regarded, I guess, in that category. And so those guys were super kind to me. And so a few weeks into wrestling on SmackDown, I was in the locker room and I was having a discussion with Batista. And he's like, "Who are you riding with?" And I told him who I was riding with at the time, and he was like, and they were OVW guys. And he's like, "No offense to those guys, but what the fuck are you going to learn from those guys? What the fuck are you going to possibly learn from riding with?" Davari was one of those guys, one of my best friends. He's like, "You need to be riding with, like, one of these older guys, these vets. That's what you need to do." And that day I was like, you know what? I'm going to take that advice. And I went up to Chris Benoit and I was like, "Hey, would you mind if I rode with you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm riding with Eddie, so I have to check it out. I'll get back to you." And he came back to me later on the day. He was like, "That's fine. You'll ride with us." He's like, "You're driving everywhere, though."
That's fair.
And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I should. As it should be."
I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to.
And so the next week, I jumped in the car with him. I rode with him for a few weeks, and and then for some reason, it was just, I think it was luck of the draw. I don't think it was because we were riding together or anything like that. It was just luck of the draw. I ended up, and I'll tell you what, like, we would run. It was me, Eddie, and Chris would drive together for a couple weeks, and I would always drive. And those guys would, at the end of the night, they would have their match. Everybody would have their match. The show would be over. Say this is a SmackDown tape, or it was a house show, whatever.
Sure.
House show would get over at 11 o'clock at night. Those guys would sit in the locker room until freaking 12:30. They'd be the last guys in the building talking to each other about Scripture, because Eddie was a born-again Christian. Right. So he would just be sitting there talking about Scripture or talking about whatever. And finally the janitor would come in and say, like, "You guys are the last ones here." And then they would sort of get the hint, like, okay, it's time to move on. And then we would have to go find a place to eat, which would generally be, like, the only place that would be open would be a TGI Fridays or a Perkins at the time. Yeah. And so we would go there. We would eat for an hour or two. And then we had a 3 or 4 hour drive, and I was the guy that was driving. So I'd be driving, and I'd have freaking toothpicks in my eyelids, trying to keep them awake, trying to keep them open. And we would make it to. We would go to they would always, like, want to go to a Hampton or something like that, which is generally like $120, $150 a night. At the time, I had just started on TV. I wasn't making a whole lot of money. Mm-hmm. $150 to me a night was 5 nights a week was fucking huge. And so I was just stressed out to the max. And I would call home and say, like, I don't have a choice in the matter. Like, I have to stay here. Because Eddie and Chris didn't share hotel rooms. It was like Eddie got a room, Chris got a room, and Ken got a room by himself. So I'm paying $150. I'm used to splitting a red roof, $35 a night room with 4 guys, no big deal. So, and then they would stand in the lobby. It's like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would stand in that lobby and they would say, like, "Okay, Eddie, what time do you want to get up in the morning and go to the gym and get going?" "No, whatever time you want to go, Chris. Really, I'm okay with it." No, Eddie, really, it's up to you. It's totally up to you." "No, Chris, really, honestly, I don't care. I can sleep in. We can do whatever." So they would pick, like, "Okay, how about 8 o'clock? It's fucking 3 o'clock in the morning. How about 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock, we'll get up, we'll get breakfast, we'll go to the gym." And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is insane. Okay, so I'm going to go in and it's going to take me a while to unwind. And by the time I go to sleep, it's going to be like 4 o'clock. and I have to be down in the lobby by 8, which means I have to be up by like 7:15, 7:30, take a shower, blah, 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 blah. So like, I'm going to get 3 fucking hours of sleep tonight. And that's the way it was. It was like that for weeks on end. And then, anyway, I needed to tell that story to say that I wrestled Eddie that last night in Indianapolis, and we went out to a steakhouse. It was Chris, Eddie, a couple other guys and I. We went out to this steakhouse. It was awesome. It was like a fucking high-end steakhouse in Indianapolis. And I remember we were just getting ready. The next week we were going to go on. I was going to take part in my first overseas tour. And Eddie was like, "You're going to get H-bombed." And I guess Halcyon was like a big thing back in the day. Like they would drop fucking Halcyon into somebody's drink, and you drink it and like you just black out. And they would do all kinds of shave your eyebrows off and whatever. And like Eddie at one point,
Plane Ride from Hell kind of stuff.
Yes, a fight from hell. And at some point, Eddie had been on one of these trips. I guess early on in Eddie's career, Eddie was screwed with a lot. Like, guys would mess with him a lot and pick on him. And he was like, one time I got H-bombed and they shaved my eyebrows off and blah, blah, blah. So he's like, "You're definitely getting H-bombed on this trip. It's your first trip. You're getting H-bombed." I was like, So
can't wait.
Yeah, I'm like, whatever. At the time, I was like, whatever. If it happens, it happens. I'll roll with it. And then I remember the next show was here in Minneapolis at the Target Center, and my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, dropped me off at the building. And as we were pulling up to the Target Center, the guy who like parked the trucks and stuff came out and said, "Did you hear about Eddie?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Eddie died." And I was like, "What?" Like I just wrestled him a couple days earlier. We had gone out to eat. We had a good time. We had parted ways at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Like stayed at the same hotel. It was like, what? Mm-hmm. And he said he's dead. And I just walked in the building and like there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Everybody was in tears because Eddie was such an integral part of that locker room. He was such a sweetheart. And I don't know what he was like before I got there, but I know what he was like after I got there. And he was an amazing human being, and he was helpful, and he cared, and just not a bad bone in his body. And that was really tough to take, and it was tough on everybody. And I remember, a lot of guys stayed back to go to his funeral from the tour. Mm-hmm. Like JBL and Chris and those guys stayed back. And then they met us about halfway through the tour. Because the first tour I did was like 19 days. Or 21 days. We did 19 different shows in 21 days. And a lot of those guys came through about the middle part. It was like Rey Mysterio and Chris Benoit and JBL all came about the midway point. But, yeah. So, yes, Eddie was as amazing as everybody says he was to me. And like I said, I wasn't there for the earlier days, unfortunately. But
you worked with Benoit too, and I think you were still at the company when that whole thing went down.
I was there the day that Vince, like I remember it vividly when we were told what happened.
Did you? And I remember because I was a junior. Travis, you and I lived at the 833 house in Chippewa, and I remember being in my room and watching Raw that night, and Vince just comes on screen, and that's when we kind of found out as a fan what was going on. Were you still traveling with Chris after Eddie's passing, or did you guys kind of at that point?
No. So after Eddie died, Chris sort of decided that he wanted to ride with like Ray, guys that were all like really close with Eddie, because Eddie was his best friend.
Yeah.
And he wanted to sort of mourn Eddie's passing and live with and ride with those guys. So yeah, he stuck to riding with like Rey Mysterio and Chavo and guys like that.
Did you guys know right away when Raw that night they canceled it and kind of just did a tribute show? I've listened to obviously numerous different podcasts of people close, and like Bob Holly saying he talked to Chris the day of. Did you guys have a bad feeling right away, or were you guys thinking like something really bad just happened and just natural causes or whatever? Did you guys have that bad feeling like, oh boy, maybe Chris went off the deep end?
So, being that I had ridden with Chris several times, I had seen some of his more, I don't know how to say it.
What's the word? Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like his quirks, his quirkiness, his weirdness, things that sort of made you sort of scratch your head a little bit. There were certain things that he said and that he talked about that I sort of said like, wow, this guy's kind of like, he's all in to the wrestling business. But you never think that somebody's going to do that.
Right.
They're never going to go to that extreme, right? And so I sort of tend to look back on it like this. Chris was a guy who had spent 20 years busting his ass. And he was a guy that it was 100 miles an hour or nothing at all. It was 100% or nothing. 95% was not. If somebody said, like, tonight you're injured a little bit, go out there and just give, like, 80%. Not in his vocabulary. Not in his wheelhouse. 100% or nothing at all. That's the way he was. Very, extremely hard work ethic. When we did WrestleMania in Chicago, I wasn't on the show. I was injured. My first WrestleMania.
I was at that one. I was
injured. 22.
I was there in attendance, but yeah, that's right.
I was injured
on that.
So I got schwacked out of that one. I didn't get to do it. We were at the hotel. We went to work out together, and on the way over to the gym, I remember him saying to me specifically, "Ken, the girl that you're with right now, you think you'll marry her?" And I said, "I think so. I don't know." And he's like, "Let me tell you what." He's like, "You need to be absolutely 100% sure and positive, because I'm just going to tell you right now that my ex-wife is," and this is his words, this is not my words, "lazy and doesn't want to work and just expects a paycheck from me, and I pay through my nose, and I'll pay until my kids are 18. And I think he had 2 kids with his ex-wife. I'm not sure. Maybe 1. I think 2. Okay. So then fast forward to now. His best friend just died. He's tired. He's beat up. Mm-hmm. His body is just at the absolute. He's at the breaking point. He's been redlining for years and years and years. His best friend dies suddenly. And then Chris said, "I need some time off." And he was only given like 3 months. And I remember he was given 3 months off. He asked for some time off. He said, "I need some time off. I need to take a break." They gave him 3 months. And he said, "And that's not enough." I remember, in real life, 3 months off of work sounds like a lot of time. Mm-hmm. In the wrestling business, when you're going 5 days a week, which really means 7 days a week, because you come home on that 6th day, you're fucking doing your laundry and repacking and thinking about how you're going to get out the next day and calling for car service to come pick you up and yada, yada, yada. You never get... And then, they're calling you to do interviews and radio interviews and things like that.
And podcasts.
Well, there were no podcasts at the time, as far as I remember. But, but stuff like that, So it's never... You're working 7 days a week, basically. 3 months is nothing. And I remember he came back, and I remember looking at him and thinking, like, he still looks tired. Like, he looks something's wrong. Again, you don't think somebody's going to do what he ended up doing ever. But looking back on it, I sort of understand it. I obviously don't condone it. I don't think it's reasonable in any sense, but I think this is the kind of stuff that contributed to it. He wasn't given any time off, and he came back, and as rumor ended up surfacing, his wife at the time was getting ready to leave him. He's already paying through the nose in child support. Now this second wife is now going to fucking tack onto that on top of it with more child support. He's tired. He's beat up. His best friend just died. They had just instituted the wellness program, which when you're working 5 days, 6 days a week, like a big part of that is recovery. And unfortunately for guys, you're not able to recover without the help of some outside sources sometimes. When you're running 6 days a week, anabolic steroids in those cases help with recovery.
Right.
They do. And they assist in, speeding up that process. And they said, you're done. No more. And all of these things sort of led to his snap. And he did what he did. And I remember being in Corpus Christi at ringside. They said, we have a meeting. And they called the meeting, and you could sort of see the murmur start going around to different people here and there. And people that knew Chris, they were crying. I remember hearing Vicky Guerrero sort of break down, and some other people that were really close to Chris sort of break down. And I was sitting, it was me, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Matt Hardy sitting together in the front row. And Vince came out and said, we haven't been able to get a hold of Chris Benoit for the last couple of days. And we ended up sending a police officer over to his house as a goodwill call. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you that Chris is dead, and so are his wife and kid. And that's all we know. And we don't know what we're going to do tonight. And that was it. And then they started, at the time we assumed that Chris had just died of natural causes or whatever. It's kind of weird that his wife and kid are involved, but maybe it was something,
carbon
monoxide or something.
Nobody knows.
But we really didn't know.
Right.
What's next on our list?
I want to make it happy.
I was looking at. I love what we're talking
about.
No
shit. Sorry. No, absolutely. I hate talking about that stuff.
But
it's so...
Can we do the gym thing? Can we talk about
the
gym just for a couple minutes?
Talk about workout things? I mean, you said you went to the gym.
Yeah, we were talking about Eddie Guerrero. We're talking about Chris Benoit.
Yeah.
You've obviously gone to the gym with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the gym quite a bit on our podcast in the last couple of months. We are big proponents of the gym. Love going to the gym.
Yeah.
My most important relationship is my relationship with the gym. Mm-hmm. I don't have a girlfriend, so that might be the reason. But what is... Can I just throw a couple questions at you, gym-wise?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. When you're going to the gym with guys who are obviously in pretty darn good shape,
Bobby Lashley.
Who are guys? Is there somebody in your head that you can think of and think, I didn't realize how fucking strong he was until I went to the gym with him? If you can throw out one or two names. I got two or three good questions just to flavor myself, I guess.
Honestly, Benoit was one of those guys who was super intense and was a slow rep guy, which for those of you who are familiar with slow reps, it's some of the most excruciating
negatives. Some people call them negatives.
Negatives, but it was even the positive, even the eccentric.
So he could go faster
portion,
if he wanted to, but he decided just to go slow.
But he would go slow on the way out too. It would be a 5 count on the way down, and then you hold for 5, and then you press up for 5. If you're doing shoulder presses, be super slow. Everything was like that. And it was
every lift, every rep?
Every lift, every rep, and when you were done, you still had 2 more in you. he would make sure of it.
When you
So
when you
that's
couldn't
the-
when you couldn't do your last one, you can do 2 more.
He would
with-
figure
with
out, you know,
me-
he'd
with
give
me.
you a
Yeah.
little assistance, and you can do 2 more, and that's the way you break through that barrier, and your body adapts then. And that's sort of the way that I've always, not always, but that's the way that when I've been serious about lifting, which I am not, that's the way I've always been.
How difficult is it to lift when you're working the schedule that you were working?
Really tough.
I can't.
For me-
Personally, I can't. I work out 5-6 days a week. Love it, but I also get 7-8 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
When you're getting 4 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, maybe if you're lucky, like your earlier stories indicated.
Yeah.
How hard is it to make yourself?
It's tough. I mean, you know, in retrospect, it's part of the job. And it's sort of, here's the job. You can't do it forever. You know, do it.
Can you ever have max out days, or do you just have to just maintain what you have? Because I feel like from your stories that you tell us and the stories I've heard from other guys, how can you have days where you really get after it and then give yourself that 48 hours or 72 hours of rest time?
It's tough, other than just never not working out, not going to the gym. And I felt like, at least in the last portion of my career at WWE and part of my career at TNA, I was burnt out. Like it's tough to maintain that kind of schedule. It really is. It's tough. And it's like you said. How do you do those workouts where you max out over? You know, at the end of the day, you have to do it. You just have to do it.
I've heard,
or you don't do it at all, and then you get, you know, part of your contract.
You don't want to look sloppy.
Part of your contract is the way you look. That is actually in your contract as a WWE performer, as a TNA Impact Wrestling performer. If at any point your physique dips below a level that you're an at-will employee, which is virtually anybody in this country now. But you're an at-will employee, and if at any point we decide that, you know, you don't fit our mold, we can fire you.
I've heard stories. I've worked with a personal trainer who's told me that he's been in the gym before with Batista or with Brock Lesnar or some other guys.
Yeah.
And I've heard other podcasts talk about Big E Langston being one of the most unbelievable bench pressers they've ever been with, that kind of stuff. Like Batista, I've heard is quick twitch, just never stops. Runs around the weight room, he's doing lifts all the time, never breaks, and then he's done. Lesnar's Olympic lifts, that kind of stuff. Is there anybody that you've worked out with that before you went to the gym with them, you had never seen the stuff that they did? Or things that just shocked you whenever you saw them do it? Anything that you can remember in your head to think, God, I can't believe that guy just did that?
So, one of the guys that is one of my best friends today is Gunner.
He's a beast.
Absolute beast, right? He's a monster.
Yeah.
One of the biggest guys that I've ever worked with in the business. Like, he's a big dude. He's jacked to the gills. Has the biggest legs. Like, we call him Quadzilla. We joke. Like, he's Quadzilla.
He's huge, yeah.
Bubba Ray is Calfzilla. He's Quadzilla. He doesn't squat with weight. He does fucking air squats. Gunner. He doesn't, like, he'll do extensions, leg extensions with like 100-pound weights. Maybe 120. Every once in a while he'll go heavy.
Yeah.
But for the most part, he does high reps, low weight. And most of his leg workouts, I'm telling you, he's got the biggest quads that I've ever seen in the business.
You know who Gunner is, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
He does air squats, which makes sense because when I started at WWE, Chris Benoit was one of the guys that said, like, hey, he sort of took me under his wing as far as workouts go, and he said, like, you want to do some squats? We're going to do squats. He was big on squats. Yeah, sure.
I think my heart would beat really fast if Chris Benoit was like, you want to do squats? Like, holy shit.
So
I'll try.
I'll fucking try. The first time he was like, let's do squats. And I said, okay. And I did as many as I could. And as many as I could was 169.
Air squats?
Air squats.
Okay. Do you have okay, air squats. There's no ball behind your back of the wall. Okay.
2, 3, like about that cadence. And I did like 169 and I was falling over.
Mm-hmm.
My legs were fucking just
jelly.
Done.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, that's fine. It's done. You're done. And the next day he was like, today we're going to do 250. And I said, all right. I was walking on pins and needles, my legs, I couldn't even walk that next day. And which is funny because like 169 just squats, just stand there and just squat down, stand back up, squat down 169 times. Doesn't really seem like that much. Should be easy. I was walking on jelly, and he said, I told him, I was like, I don't know if I can do it. I can't even hardly walk. And he said, he's like, that's the gimmick. He's like, just push through it. You'll be fine. And he smiled, and toothless smile. And so I pushed and did 250, and the next day my legs were even more sore than they were that day. And then we just kept on from there. Within a few weeks, I was doing like 400 or 500 squats a day. And Jesus. I had to go buy new jeans. Just air squats. That's all I was doing. I wasn't doing leg extensions. And before that, I had been doing pile as many plates on the bar. 5 plates on each side of the bar, and you're squatting. And I was doing that. And my legs were never bigger than when I was just doing air squats. Yeah. So I had to go out and buy new jeans because my jeans didn't fit. So what I'm saying is the leg muscles are fast twitch, or is it slow twitch? Slow twitch fibers, which respond. Look at bicyclers.
Yeah.
Look at guys that do Tour de France, whatever. Their legs are always freaking ginormous, and it's those high reps.
That's where you can add the weight too. That's where you can add that weight. That's gonna be big. I might start that.
I'm telling you, man. Just squats. Just squat.
Air squats. It's gonna be
like huge. 500 a day.
That's huge. All right. Well, what's next on your list, Ryan? Because I got the only answer I needed now.
You're ready to go. Your WWE tenure, you won the U.S. title. Awesome, cool. I mean, we talked about titles being kind of a gimmick, but WrestleMania 2007 Ford Field, Money in the Bank ladder match. You win it. Yep. And we talked about how it's kind of a gimmick, but this is kind of like a stepping stone, I guess, in WWE, because typically, I don't know what the percentage is now, but if you win this, you cash in, you win.
Like 99%, because I'm the only guy.
Because you're the only 1%.
They won't even talk about it.
Right? They didn't even give you the cool briefcase with the thing on the side. You just got the black one.
I had KK.
Did you?
Yeah.
And you had to carry through the airports and all that. With that too. Yeah. When you won that, were you told that, hey, Ken, you're going to win this, and at WrestleMania 24, like you mentioned in your promos, you're going to cash in. That's what you wanted to do. Was that the plan? Because you ended up losing to Edge, and he took it from you.
The Money in the Bank was WrestleMania 23, and you...
And the match was insane.
In the match, it was... We had you. Fit Finlay was in the match.
Yeah. Matt Hardy, Jeff Hardy.
Matt, Jeff, Edge, Orton.
Yeah. Was Kane?
Yeah, I think Kane.
Kane wasn't in it.
Booker?
King Booker was in it. Because that was the match that Jeff did the huge leg drop through the onto Edge through the ladder, which
let those guys
still scary. Still scary to watch to this day. I don't know if Edge actually got hurt. He might have. I don't really know.
I was shocked being in attendance though. Like when you won it, I was like, because this was 2007. You've been there 2 years. I was like, shit, he's doing it. Like this is Ken's time, and you won it, and you're in front of 70,000 people. Yeah. Whatever it is. That's
83,000 people, I think.
Right? So that's your WrestleMania.
81,000 people.
Don't shortchange.
So that's your WrestleMania moment.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can never explain what that feels like. I mean,
actually, it's weird because when you're in the moment, when you're there, it feels like every other crowd. Like literally, I remember walking down the ramp and thinking like, oh, fucking 81,000 people, and I looked out and it just looked like a normal full house. But then afterwards, you go up into the skybox with the family members, and you look down and you're like, holy shit!
Yeah,
there's 81,000 people here. And there's millions of people watching.
And
that's weird.
And you're in Detroit for, I guess, when you look at nationwide, it's not that far away from where you grew up. Right. To be completely honest,
Midwest.
It's there. Did you have a ton of family there? Did you have?
My wife was there. My mother was there. To me, that's it was like the most important people in my life were there.
Don't tell us if you can't, but. How many people know that you're winning that before you grab the briefcase?
I don't think I told my wife, and I didn't tell anybody.
When did you find out?
My wife was there. My mother-in-law was there. My sister-in-law was there, and I don't think I told anybody. I think I found out, and I probably told my wife, like in the hotel room, like, "Hey, I'm winning." Honey, did I tell you?
No.
I didn't. She just told me. I didn't. I did not.
She's in the room. She didn't know. She did not know.
I found out. Well, the funny thing is you get there 5 days before,
right? And do the access and
all
that stuff.
Actually, when you're doing the access, they have a room where you go in and there's a ring, and they have ladders and all sorts of stuff, and you get in there with all the guys that you're going to be in the match with, and you start talking stuff out. I didn't find out that I was going to win the match until about a day before, and the thing is like. I think 3 days before, Edge was going to win the match.
Edge was the favorite.
Edge was going to win the match. And then, 2 days before, okay, we're going to put Kennedy over. And then the next... And I always like, hey, look, if it happens, it happens. If not, whatever. It is what it is. And then, hey, we're putting Kennedy over. This is this. But yeah, I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't really know. Like I said, up until the point where the music hit, anything can change. So I went out there, did my thing, and it was cool. And no, I wasn't told like, oh, you're going to be the next guy or anything like that. You're winning the Money in the Bank. That's all they tell you. Like, you're winning the Money in the Bank briefcase. Then, fast forward a few months, Undertaker has the title. Undertaker gets hurt. Undertaker needs surgery. I'm at a show. I don't remember where the show was, but I was traveling with Matt Hardy. Matt and I left the building. We're driving down the road. We're 5 or 10 minutes down the road, and we get a phone call. I get a phone call from Michael Hayes. Michael Hayes says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm 10 minutes away." He says, "Come back. Vince needs to talk to you." So, naturally, I immediately start like, okay, I got the Money in the Bank briefcase. Undertaker's hurt. I know this. I'm pretty sure what's going on. I go back to the building. I go to Vince's office. I'm on my way to Vince's office, and Batista's coming out of Vince's office, and he comes up to me. He stops. He gives me a big hug. He says, like, dude, he's like, you've worked your ass off. You busted your ass. You deserve this. I'm happy for you. And I played dumb. I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. So I go into the office, and it's Stephanie and Vince, and Stephanie and Vince say, look, we hoped that Undertaker would... Undertaker's our champ. We hope that Undertaker would hold the title for a year at least. Unfortunately, he has to have surgery. We need to take the title off of him. We feel that the best way to do that is to have you cash in your Money in the Bank briefcase at the next SmackDown taping, and at which point, we're going to have Undertaker go through. He's going to go through a cage match. There's going to be a bunch of scenarios that he'll go through. So he'll be softened up, and at which point you'll hit your music, you'll come out, you'll cash in the briefcase, and we'll have a new champion. And he's like, he laid out the scenario for me. He's like, do you have any questions? And I said, honestly, and I I don't know if I regret this or not, because like I said, I'm an honest person. I try to be as honest as possible, and I think honesty is the best policy. I said, I appreciate you guys laying that out for me. And they said, like, we feel like Batista is best served when he is, like right now, Batista's hot, but we feel like when he's on the chase for the title, like he's a little bit hot. When Austin was chasing the title, it was hotter.
It's always better to chase than have it.
Than when he has it. And when he's got it, it's like, oh, okay, now what? It's better to chase it. And so he said, like, we feel like Batista's really hot right now when he's chasing. If we feel like his stock he's our guy. If we feel like his stock is starting to dip, we'll take the title off you and put it back on Batista. But whatever. And I was just like, look, I appreciate you telling me all this, but at the end of the day, wrestling is about telling stories, and I'm a team player, and I just want to do what's right for the company and right for business. And they said, like, we appreciate your, you saying that, and that's why we're putting the title on. That's why we feel comfortable putting the title on you. So the very next week, I do house shows. In the first match, we did a double shot one day in Poughkeepsie, which is like home to all kinds of wrestling history, this building in Poughkeepsie. And to this day, like when I go back there, I'm sort of like, fuck, this is where it happened. Batista threw me into the corner, and he came in and he gave me like a short little Jap clothesline, and he pulled me out actually and gave me a clothesline, and I took a bump, and when I took a bump, I felt something pop in my triceps, and when I rolled out to the floor, Fit Finley looked at my arm and said, like, that looks fucked up. And my arm immediately started swelling up. I couldn't bend my elbow. By the time I got down to the locker room, my palm was black and blue. Like, there was so much blood built up in my arm. Like, by the end of the day, I couldn't bend my arm at all.
And this was at a house show?
It was at a house show. It was 2 days before I was supposed to do this, cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase, whatever. 3 days before. So I ended up, they took me from Poughkeepsie to somewhere in Pennsylvania. It escapes me for the time being. But I go to this place, I have an MRI done, and I go to my hotel room and I wait. And the phone rings the next day, and it's Stephanie, and Stephanie says, Ken, we got your MRI results back. Do you know what's going on with your arm? And I said, no. And she said, well, you tore your triceps off the bone, and unfortunately you're going to have surgery. You're going to be out for 7 to 8 months. However, we still need to get that title off of Taker, and we feel the best way to do that is through that Money in the Bank briefcase. So we're having Vince's jet. We're going to have Vince's jet come and pick you up. We're going to fly you to Penn State. Your Edge is going to challenge you for the title or for the briefcase. You're going to give up the briefcase, and he's going to go on and do what you were going to do. Yeah. So I remember thinking at the time, like, I have a year to cash in this briefcase. I'm only going to be out for 7 or 8 months. 7 or 8 months from now, I could come back and fucking cash it in. Nobody would expect anything and whatever. However, as I just stated in my conversation that I had with Vince and Stephanie in their office, business is business, and whatever you think is good for business is good for business. So, okay. So they came and picked me up, and Edge called me a chicken on TV, and I said, nobody calls me a chicken. And I
coming from the Wisconsin chicken,
yeah. Which, as as you would do, I gave up the briefcase, and Edge, I couldn't even bend my arm. I literally couldn't bend they wrapped it up. I couldn't bend it. I had him, Vince said, like, what can you do? And I said, like, fucking nothing, really.
Everything I can with my left arm.
Yeah. And I said, like, I don't know, have him jump me, roll me in the ring, ring the bell, and have him spear me. Like, that's it. okay, that's what we'll do. So we did that, and he won the briefcase. He went on the next day to do what so I was like, that close to doing it. And then come to find out the very next day, after I did the Penn State thing with Edge, they sent me to Birmingham, Alabama, where I met with Dr. James Andrews. And I'm sitting on the table. James comes up, starts, feeling my triceps, feeling my arm. He's like, so you tore your triceps, huh? And for whatever reason, he hadn't gotten the MRI from where I was in Pennsylvania the night before. And he's like, so they say you tore your triceps, huh? And I said, yeah. He's like, that doesn't feel like a tricep tear to me. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, I don't think that's torn. But they couldn't find the MRI or whatever. So he said, let's do another one. So they did another MRI, and he came back 30 minutes later, and he was like, yeah, you didn't tear your triceps. It's just a hematoma. It's just a bruise, basically. It's just a large bruise, and you'll be fine. And, 1 month, maybe 2 months at the most, and you'll be back on the road. And so I was like, it just, in one sense, it changed the whole trajectory of my career. And when you're there, you get hurt, it's your fault. Which is weird.
Do you hold any...
Punk sort of talked about that in the podcast with Cabana.
Yep.
You get hurt, it's your fault. And you're punished for it. And I've heard Del Rio talk about it too. Mm-hmm. They want you to talk about, if you get concussed, boom, you get concussed, tell us about it. Well, you tell them about it, and they fucking take you off everything, and you don't get paid. Mm-hmm. So people don't. So what do you naturally do?
You don't.
I need to.
And there's wrestlers
so you
who are
don't say
I
anything.
can do it.
Exactly. In any sport, you're going to fight through it.
Right.
People who are athletic, people who are competitive, will fight through adversity, even when they probably shouldn't.
Did you have a good relationship with? Obviously, you said it came during a match with Batista.
Oh,
Did you have a good relationship with Dave?
Yeah,
Did you have
any
pissed off moments?
It wasn't anything that he did or anything like that. Yeah. It wasn't. No. Even in the situations where I've had injuries that came at the hands of other people, which is funny because part of my career was he's injury prone. When I was at WWE, the first time I got injured, I was on the apron at a show. We were in Italy, and there was a guy who was supposed to come over and just give me a forearm. I was on the apron. He was going to give me a forearm, and I was going to fall to the floor. Well, he came over and drop kicked me into the fucking 27th row, and I landed on my side and tore my lat off my bone. Ended up having to have lat surgery. My lat, which is one of the biggest muscles in your body, right? Had to have surgery. Was out 8 months. Never said a word because you know what? It's fucking wrestling, and sometimes things happen, and it's not ballet, and whatever. It wasn't intentional. I don't think he said I'm gonna hurt this fucker. It just happened that way, and. And with Batista, literally, Batista gave me a clothesline, and I did pop my triceps. And then the next time I injured myself significantly, it was a miscommunication, and I took a bad bump and dislocated my shoulder, and never said anything bad about the guy. It's not his fault. It's wrestling. If but it. When you really boil it down, it was sort of most of those injuries were sort of at the hands of other people. When I got drop kicked into the 27th row, that wasn't expected. But I have no, I have no ill feelings towards those people.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've heard the things that you're injury prone. I never believed that it's just bad luck. You know, it happens in this business.
Bad luck. Bad timing. It's the thing. Like, am I injury prone? If somebody comes up to you and fucking whacks you in the knee with a sledgehammer, like, are you? Oh, hey, he's injury prone, right? Or are you prone to being injured by others?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know the situation with your time coming to an end in 2009 with them. I wish it never happened. I guess I'm a WWE loyal guy because I grew up on it, so I wish you were still there.
Sure. Well, it's it is the biggest game in town. Like,
right.
Nobody's. Hopefully, we'll change that. But I don't know.
So I've listened, and then I guess a couple other questions. And then we got a couple names with the WWE too, and then we can kind of wrap things up. And obviously, like I listened to other podcasts before, and TNA talent's under contract. Bubba Ray was one of them. Matt and Jeff Hardy, quite a bit too. We've talked about it earlier. Never say never in this business. You're with TNA now, but now you have a family, obviously. So being on the road 300 days a year is probably not an option. But if you had a talent-friendly contract and they offered it to you on the other side, WWE, and your contract with TNA had run out, would it be something that you would consider going back to the?
I at this point, like I don't. TNA is my. I work for TNA. That's it. Period. However, like you said, I do have a family to feed, and this is my trade. I'm a wrestler. I'm a pro wrestler, and there are only so many places to do that. So I don't know. You never say never in this business, like you said. But at this point, there are just so many things that I believe that I could do well enough on the indies to make a good living for my family, and not have to do that crazy schedule.
Yeah.
And deal with working for a big corporation. That I would try to do that, I think, first.
What's the biggest difference between the 6-sided ring and the typical squared circle 4-sided ring?
So when I first got to TNA, my very first night in the company was the first night that TNA didn't use the 6-sided ring.
Praise hallelujah, man! It worked for you.
So getting on my way there, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how to work in this 6-sided ring. And the very first night that I get there was the night that Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan convinced the powers that be to not use the 6-sided ring. And I remember thinking, I dodged a bullet. I really did. And for the last 4.5, 5 years, I was like, not really worried about it too much. And then TNA obviously decided to go back to the 6-sided ring, and I was kind of against it at first. I was adamantly against it. And then...
Well, it bumps harder, right? It bumps a lot harder.
Well, that's what you would think. But the thing is the difference between the TNA 4-sided ring and the WWE 4-sided ring is that the TNA ring is 18 by 18, and the WWE is 20 by 20. And that extra...
that extra 2 feet, it's a lot.
Well, it's squared, right?
Yeah.
So it's 2 feet squared, so it's like a lot bigger. I don't know.
It's an extra step or whatever it might be, but yeah.
It's big. It's a lot bigger.
One thing, too, like we mentioned my tryout or whatever, I was like, I'm not used to a 20 by 20. It's an extra step. It's bigger. Mm-hmm. It's like, all right, this actually makes a huge difference.
And it has real ropes.
Yeah.
Real legit rope. It's rope that gives.
Yes.
When you bounce.
It's not your garden hose or whatever they use.
Yes. And the thing about the 6-sided ring though is that it's more like a 20 in the sense that you have a bigger area to work around in. And I always liked that about the 20. I didn't care about the bumping surface. Like I guess that was nothing that ever really sort of registered with me.
Sure.
It was just like, this is my surface that I'm given to perform in. And in this particular circumstance, I was surprised at how much more room you have in the 6-sided ring to actually do your thing. And the only thing that sort of screws you up is when you're in a tag match and you're used to...
You don't know where the corner is.
Exactly. You don't know. You try to keep the guy away from his corner and away from his ropes. And it's different. I don't know. It sounds stupid, but...
So what's...
You want to make sure that you keep your guy away so that it's not easy for him to just reach out and tag his partner.
Which we could have a whole podcast on that.
Right. Psychology of wrestling. Psychology of tag matches.
We might have to.
Cutting the ring in half and those kinds of things.
It's unbelievable how bad some people are at it.
Yeah, and it seems like a simple, easy concept, but for some reason it's not. It's not. And then you get guys that have been in the business for 15 years that have tag matches and don't understand the concept of, like, if I'm the guy that's in the ring, in the tag match, that's getting my ass kicked, that gets cut off and is getting my ass handed to me, and I'm trying to tag to my opponent, that is my fucking ultimate objective.
Right.
Is to try to tag. And I'm constantly, no matter what, I'm trying to crawl through the guy's legs to try to tag, and he's cutting me off and he's stopping me. And every time that I try to do that and he stops me, it makes it that much more important and more meaningful when when I finally do make it through the guy's legs and tag. But yeah, like you said, we could do a whole tag.
So I broke into the business in tag, and one time I was working, and they let me be close to my corner, and they started talking with the crowd. And I started going to my corner. I was there to make a tag. He didn't come to me. I was like, fuck it, I'm making the tag. And they were pissed at me. I was like, you didn't cut me off. You didn't do shit. I'm not going to not take out. But differences in, and I told you I was going to ask you this, differences in Dixie Carter and Vince McMahon.
Wow.
Other than Dixie's middle name is Kennedy.
And she's also a female. And she's really attractive female.
She is a very attractive female.
I mean, I would date her. But this is for you, though.
Her husband might take issue with that. I'm not sure. Serge might take issue with that. I mean, I don't know. The differences are, Vince is a businessman who is sort of a ruthless, look, this is business, and sorry about that. Like, he does what he feels is best for business at all times.
Did you have a good relationship with him, would you say, when you were there?
I felt like I did when I was there, yeah.
Okay.
I remember at one point, like, he would say, like, early on, he said, like, I want you to sort of be around and, come to my office and hang out, and, like, I always felt weird about that. Like, I always felt like, well, if I don't have a reason to go to his office, then why the fuck would I go to his office? Other than just to be a politicker, and I don't like politics. Like, I'm not a politicker. Even though politics is something that interests me.
But if you want to hear him talk about politics, you can look into the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so I never did that, which, looking back on it, I don't know. In some senses, in some sense, I wish that I did. In another sense, like, look, I can look at myself in the mirror and say, like, I wasn't fake. I didn't fucking phone anything in. I didn't pretend to be somebody that I wasn't. So, what happens. Other people will look at that and say, like, well, that wasn't the best business decision to make, and that wasn't smart, and that wasn't smart politically. Well, you're probably right. I don't know. But, I feel like I had a good relationship with him. Dixie Carter is she's just a good human being, and, I've heard of scenarios where somebody said, like, oh, you need to fire this person, and Dixie has said, this person has been nothing but loyal to me. Why would I need to fire this person? Why should I fire this person when this person has done nothing to deserve to be fired? So, I feel like she's a good person. She's she's been nothing but good to me, and her family's been good to me. We've had, my wife and I have had dinner with her and her family, and it's just, to me, she's a sweetheart, and she epitomizes, the family aspect of this business. I think that in the end, we're all family. We're all sort of related to one another. Whether you've been to the dance or not, we're all fucking related.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's kind of weird, you lose somebody too, somebody passes away. It's like you feel affected, even though maybe you personally never met that person. But the wrestling family's unique. We're different. You have to have thick skin. You have to. We're definitely different. That's for sure. Would you consider yourself a Paul Heyman guy when you're in WWE?
I absolutely would. Yeah. Well, if I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if it wasn't for Paul Heyman. And I sort of touched on that earlier. Paul Heyman is one of my favorite human beings in the entire. Just as a human being, he's been nothing but phenomenal to me in my career. He told me, I'm going to do so much stuff with you that they're gonna take notice of you. They have to take notice of you. And like I said, in this business, you believe half of what you see and none of what you hear.
Right.
And so I just sort of took it with a grain of sand. And I remember talking to Joey Mercury at the time, and I was like, and this was really early on. I didn't know Paul, and it was before he had said, and I said, I don't know, Paul's got a reputation for being and he goes, what? And I said, yeah, he's got a reputation, whatever, for, he says, no. He's like, fucking Paul's amazing. Paul will fucking, if he says he's going to do something, he'll do it. And I was like, okay. And I respected Joey Mercury's opinion at the time. And it comes to find out that, you know what? A lot of the shit that you read on the dirt sheets and on the internet is total bullshit. And when it comes to Paul Heyman, it's total bullshit. Because Paul Heyman is a fucking amazing human being and has in my opinion, the smartest mind about this business. Steve Austin is a close second.
Who's also a Paul Heyman guy, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. Or is at least tied for first.
Right.
Somebody who has given so much and done so much for wrestling, to put wrestling on the map. I mean, Steve Austin, look what he did for wrestling. And his mind still is constantly turned. He's one of those guys that his mind is constantly creative and coming up with new ideas and things like that.
He's a genius.
He's a genius, yeah. And so is Paul Heyman. So, yeah.
Speaking of Paul Heyman guys, current WWE champion, Brock Lesnar. We've talked off air a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I don't know that you've ever worked him. I don't know if you ever wrestled with him, worked out with him, but you said that he's somebody that has been influential in your career. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when I was when Daivari and ODB and Austin Aries and I were trying to make it in the business, we would go to these tryouts and be local talent and get these, squash matches and things that some of the other local talent would always say, oh, you guys are just getting squashed. They don't take you seriously. They think you guys are goofs. You're never going to get taken seriously. You're never going to get a job. What are you thinking? And I always remember thinking, as long as I fucking get better and try, and there is no formula. Mm-hmm. There's no one set specific formula for how anybody gets a job. But I remember going to a couple shows, and I ended up, I knew that Brock lived in Minnesota, and I knew that I lived in Minnesota, and I just happened to say, yeah, man, I live in Minnie. And we got into a conversation, and we talked, and we had some stuff in common, and he said, and then he ended up, he watched my match that night. Whoever I worked with, he was like, I see some potential there. And he said, the guy that trained me was Brad Rangans. Brad Rangan's trained all kinds of guys in the business.
JBL,
Lesnar,
Kurt,
the Road Warriors, I believe, Kurt Hennig,
right?
All kinds of guys.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Look, he was a guy that really helped me in my career, and I'm gonna reach out to him and see if he'll help you out too." And so we exchanged numbers. Brock Lesnar, who at the time was fucking getting a huge push from the WWE.
2001, 2002.
Yep, getting a huge push. Said, look, and it was the night when he worked Spanky, and he like F5'd Spanky into the ring post.
Yeah.
And Spanky got super good color. I remember he was just covered in head to toe with blood. I remember Brock that night saying, like, give me your number and I'll give it on to Brad Rangan. And a couple days later, Brad called me and said, hey, I got your number from Brock. I'm starting up a camp pretty soon. I'm going to do a camp. I'm going to do classes. If you want to come. And so I signed up, and I went through class with Kurt's son, Joe Hennig.
Yeah.
And, like Don Fry was there. That's where I met Brian Knobs and Jerry Sags and a bunch of other guys. And just the stuff that I learned in that class was amazing. Like little things that I had never even thought about. Like when you see a tackle drop down. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, for the boys out there that are listening to the podcast, the tackle drop down. He's like, a drop down is not just a move; it's an offensive move. It's you're trying to fucking trip the guy,
correct? Yeah,
who's coming off the ropes. So why would you drop down in the center of the ring? You would drop down. You would try to, as the guy's coming off the ropes, you try to trip them by dropping down, and they outsmart you and they jump over you. And then they hit the other ropes, and you come up and whatever. And I never thought about it like that. And, just certain things like that just sort of helped me psychologically with putting matches together and things like that. So,
yeah, I mean, it's Brad Rangan has got a huge name, and then obviously Eddie Sharkey.
And let me, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but so then. Fast forward a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, 2 years later, and I had a match, or I did a tryout, and got to work out with a bunch of guys in the ring. And Paul Heyman and Jim Ross happened to be sitting at ringside. They were the only two guys that were sitting at ringside while all of us local guys were working out. And they said, and after the little workout, Paul sort of said, come here for a second. And I went over and he said, like, who trained you? And I said, Brad Rangan's. And when I said Brad Rangan's, like, he was already a Brock Lesnar guy. Brock is considered to be a Paul Heyman guy, but Paul Heyman was a Brock Lesnar guy. And he said, like, I know Brad Rangan's. I know who that is. And, he's a hell of a talent. And he's like, you've been trained well, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help you out. And he tried to help me out that day. It ended up not coming to fruition. But in the long run, years later, I go to OVW. I'm doing the interviews, and I would go into those interview rooms with Paul. And that's what happened. Like I told you before, we would do the interviews, and it would just be up to us. Like, you come up with a promo, 2-minute promo, or 1-minute promo or whatever, go in, you cut it with Paul and a camera and nobody else, and then Paul would critique you, and then you would come back the next day and try to improve upon whatever he critiqued you on. You would improve upon it. I remember I would go in there and I would cut my promo, and he would say, thank you. And I would say, is that it? Sometimes he would give me a little bit of feedback, but it was always like pretty minimal. And I would come back and I would change whatever he had suggested that I change, and then he would say, "Okay, cool, thank you, have a good day." And I would say, like, any suggestions, any criticism, whatever? Like, nope, that's good, thank you. And I remember, like, leaving and thinking, this guy fucking hates me. He thinks I'm the drizzling shits. Fuck, I'm screwed. And then, come to find out, like, he actually meant what he said. He liked what he saw. And so, I in the long run, I think my training with Brad Ragans through Brock Lesnar really helped me in my career. I know it did, because to this day, like, I still see people doing fucking drop downs in the middle of the ring, and it drives me insane.
There's a lot with that tackle drop down spot that drives me insane. But you worked a series, or I guess a program, with arguably, some might say, the greatest wrestler of all time, Shawn Michaels.
Mm-hmm.
For you, I think you watched him as well.
Yeah.
How was that?
Amazing.
Was he as good as everybody said he was?
Yeah.
What year was this?
2007, 2008.
Because you had like
I was on Raw
you had like
at the
pay-per-view
time.
matches
This
with him,
was
right? And then you
I had
Royal
Raw
Rumble,
matches,
you
pay-per-view. I remember I think I had a 3-segment match with him, or at least a 2-segment match with him on a Raw.
And were you referring to a 2-segment match or a 3-segment match?
So, like, you wrestle on TV, you wrestle, and then they go to commercial, then you come back, you wrestle through the...
You're getting
through the
20
whole
minutes,
break.
25 minutes
Then
in
you
the match, yeah.
have another commercial break, and you wrestle through the next commercial break. You know?
Which is pretty much unheard of on WWE at this point. But,
Gotcha.
I mean, you guys put some time in.
Yeah, we did get, 20,
This is when Shawn,
20 or 30
obviously
minutes.
Shawn came back after the back injury. He's a different person at this point, but can still work his ass off. I do remember a lot of the matches, and they were great. And I'm assuming, I'm going to go on a limb here and just say you learned a little bit from Shawn.
Absolutely. I learned something from everybody that I worked with, really. Like, people always say, well, who's your favorite, or who's your, who did you look up to? I looked up to so many people. It's hard to just put it's hard to put one particular person in a box and say, like, that's the guy. Because I tried to learn something from everybody that I worked with. I really did. I have a funny story about working with Shawn, though, that he probably doesn't think is too funny. But so I remember, I was a heel at the time, and I had put him in a body vice. So we're sitting on the ground, and I sort of have my legs wrapped around his midsection. And I'm a heel, and I always thought, like, the worst thing you can do to a guy is spit on him or fucking mush him in the face.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And so I'm trying to be as soft as I possibly can, because I'm working with Shawn Michaels, the Shawn Michaels,
the Heartbreak Kid.
And he waited until commercial break. We were in commercial. The ref came over and said, "Okay, you guys are in commercial." And I remember I was like mushing him in the face, and he goes, "It's my fucking face! It's like you're fucking butcher. Get your hands out of my face! I breathe out of my face!" And I was like, I didn't think I was mushing you that fucking hard. Like, I'm sorry.
Stiff prick.
He was hot. He was pissed. So I'm feeling like garbage already. And then we're coming up on a commercial break. And I remember, like, they sort of count you down. Like, all right, we're going to be back in 10 seconds, whatever, and then 5, 4,
The ref
3,
is your compass.
And finally, we're back up. And when you come out of break, they want you to have action. So he starts giving me a couple of elbows and starts fighting up out of this hole that I have him in. And I was chewing gum. And I remember...
No.
Idiot. You fucking idiot. Why were you chewing gum?
Why the fuck would you chew gum? And he gave me an elbow to the stomach, and I spit it out right into his hair.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw it, and I was like, oh my God. And I reached out, and I went to grab it, and I yanked like a giant chunk of hair out of his head. And you can look it up online. It's on there. It's on YouTube. Like, you see me he gives me a couple elbows, and then all of a sudden you see me just tear a giant chunk of hair out of his head. And I'm sure because we got the back and we had some words.
All pleasantries.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So
beautiful.
HBK.
But you know, in the long run, like he was awesome to work with. He is fucking phenomenal. He really is.
Is he the kind of guy you don't need to talk to before a match and you can just go through it?
Literally, like, you could just go out there and call it in the ring and everything's cool.
How about a guy you've mentioned?
We were there when we saw the streak.
The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak.
We were there last year.
The undefeated streak that ended last year. Ryan and I were there in person to
watch. You were
to watch Brock Lesnar break the streak.
So you completely. So I've heard you talk about this before. Like I've heard you earlier when we were talking. You said I tend to look at things from a more business standpoint of things. So you guys saw the total business.
I don't. I mean, I was
wearing an Eat, Sleep, Conquer, Repeat T-shirt, a Brock Lesnar T-shirt that day.
So
I bought it.
Happy.
I bought it when I walked in. I like Brock Lesnar. I'm a fan of Brock Lesnar. I love the Undertaker, but I just bought it because I didn't have a T-shirt, and I walked in.
I'm always gonna say like Lesnar didn't need to be propelled. He was already there, but given what he's doing now, I don't know. I mean, who else would have done it? I mean, who else with a badass with them should have done it? I don't know.
But you had somewhat of a story about Brock Lesnar. You have worked with the Undertaker inside the ring.
Yeah. And before you got it, I mean, we sneak peeked the Brothers of Destruction DVD on the network, and you and MVP are the first thing to show up. Like you do the sneak peek, your tag match on a SmackDown, I believe, or whatever it was. Where it ended up where you got in the hearse, the lights went out, lights came on, he's in the car with you. And that was some entertaining ass TV.
One of my favorite.
It was even to this day, like
literally when Ryan told me, "Hey, we're gonna talk to Ken Anderson on the show," I was like, "Cool, that sounds awesome. That'll be a really good time." First thing I did was I Googled or I Wikipedia'd or something just to see, hey, did he work with this guy or this guy? And when I saw you work with The Undertaker, I went to the Brothers of Destruction's DVD. I wasn't even looking for you. First thing that came up. And it was compelling. It was a 10-minute...
Your facial expression?
Compelling
it's
situation.
Fucking priceless, man. When the lights come back on, and Taker looks scary as shit. But like...
He does, as usual.
And you look... I mean, that was compelling, entertaining television. And I am in awe. I'm jealous as hell that you... I mean, you've worked with Kurt Angle, you've worked with Sting, you've worked with Shawn Michaels, but the fact that you got to work with the greatest character in professional wrestling, I think he is the absolute greatest character.
Yeah.
Over Sting, over Warrior, over whatever, to maintain his status for as long as he did. But you got to work with him for a series of matches.
For like almost a year. Like MVP and I were married to him and Kane for about a year.
I mean, he was the judge, the juror, and the executioner of that locker room, and you were working matches with him.
And we were like tight with him. We were, you know, he's one of my good friends. Like I consider him to be a friend to this day. Like I still get in touch with him. And when Dallas fucking plays Green Bay next week in Green Bay, I will call. I will.
Mark, you're gonna call Mark.
In fact, I am going to text him right now and say you're fucking going down. No, and that's always been our little joke. Like we always like bet on the Cowboys Packer games. But
first, were you shocked that the streak ended? Did you watch it?
Yes, of course. Okay. I mean, you never know. Like for years and years and years, and the thing is like nobody ever knows anything really. Taker didn't know that the streak was going to end until probably...
What was it, 4 hours before the show?
A couple hours before.
Yeah, they said 4 hours before the show, I think, on JR's podcast or Stone Cold's podcast. This is when they made the decision, which...
I mean, who knows? Like, that may be accurate. It may not be accurate. You know, if you heard it there, it's probably more likely that it is accurate. The thing is like things aren't thought out. We don't think things that far in advance. It's almost impossible to do so because of the nature of injuries and other things. Like you have these intangibles in the wrestling business that you don't have in any other business that you can't plan for. But in my opinion,
before we get to talking about like Taker himself, is I thought, and I watched that whole pay-per-view. Me personally, I thought that was the most brilliant execution of storyline. I look at the whole pay-per-view as one giant. I look at every wrestling show as one continuous story. That's the way I was always taught. Like, you don't want the first match to go out and you don't want chair shots and tables and stuff like that in the first match, because what do you do? What do you do in the main event? How do you follow that? You want it to build. The whole show is one continuous story.
Correct.
And it's told in different chapters, and it's told with different people. And in that particular case, the biggest thing that ever happened for Daniel Bryan was Undertaker losing that match. That catapulted Daniel Bryan. Like, it was. Look, we've got this guy who he's way over with our crowd, but he's not at the same level as like an Undertaker or a Brock Lesnar or somebody like that. But how do we catapult him? We catapult him by fucking let's sweep the rug out from underneath people. Let's kick them in the balls really, really hard. Harder than they've ever been kicked. And it was apparent, because when Undertaker lost that match, the reaction is like it's never been seen before in wrestling. I've never seen anything like that.
I turned around and I felt embarrassed to be wearing a Brock Lesnar t-shirt.
I've never seen anything like it in the wrestling business.
No,
there was no reaction.
It was 80,000 people, and it was
Undertaker. Undertaker, fucking Brock Lesnar, two of the biggest stars in the history of the business. Like, whatever. I don't care if you don't like Brock Lesnar because he's only a part-time. Fuck you.
Thank you very much again.
Fuck you.
We're on the same boat.
He's a fucking star.
Yes.
And he's a star, and he's in the position that he's in because he's a fucking star.
He draws money.
Because he's good at what he does, and he looks believable, and he is believable, and he's a fucking star.
I absolutely agree.
He's a legit badass.
And he's a legit, and he could whoop your ass, and fucking he'd probably whoop just about anybody in the locker room's ass. And that was another thing. Like, you've got this guy who's got an undefeated streak. Who else is going to beat his ass?
That's exactly.
Believably.
If it wasn't going to be him, nobody would do it.
Who?
Nobody would do it. That's the only man who legitimately is believable to do it.
The year before, when I saw Punk wrestle, like, Punk had the fucking... That match was unbelievable. I texted both of those guys that day and said, like, your match should have been the fucking main event.
It was the main event. It didn't go on last, but it was the main event.
It was unbelievable. It was a great...
Pay me like it was.
It was absolutely unbelievable.
It absolutely was the main event. It was unbelievable. It was a great match.
But is he believably Taker?
Sure. Yeah. And at the way where Punk was, yes. Yeah. I think he was believable. Maybe that's because I like Punk and because he's a friend of mine, but I don't know. In my opinion, yes. Punk could have beaten Undertaker. However, Punk was gone at that time. Who else is going to beat him? Mm-hmm. Who else? And so I always felt like, they punted everybody in the nuts when Taker lost.
Real hard.
Real hard. And you saw it. You saw it happen. It was brilliant. And I remember thinking, when I watched it, I was like, you got to be shitting me. And then I thought, like...
The happiness.
But wait, Daniel, like, you could just see from my perspective, from being a worker, from being in the business, like, Daniel Bryan is going to win the fucking... Like, he's got to win now.
They took people on a high and low...
Which is what they're supposed
for a year in 3.5 hours.
Yep.
Daniel Bryan over Triple H was a high. It was whatever was in between that nobody can remember because who cares? It was the low of The Undertaker losing, and it was the greatest high of the year.
The greatest high of the year, exactly.
And it was beautifully told.
Yep.
It was beautifully told, and we were there. And
that was beautiful. And whether it was intentional or not will remain to be seen forever.
And it worked.
And I'm sure the people that are involved will probably always say, like, oh, yeah, that's absolutely the way that we intended it to be. And it's possible that was a total mistake, but I don't know. It was perfectly executed. It was beautiful. It was great storytelling from, if you look at that whole show as one continuous, is the Hobbit, the 3-hour movie.
Yes.
Yep.
It was well done.
It was very good.
It took you on that emotional roller coaster. It took you on that high, that low, that ultimate low, like I can never recover from this, to yes, my guy won.
My guy won, and now I want to go to Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
So Work and Taker, though.
Yeah. So Work and Taker was just, is one of the biggest highs of my entire career, just because of the way that he treated me. And the way that he treated, I felt like he treated Hassan, MVP, and I like we were his little brothers. And I'm sure that's happened in the past before, too.
How big is he?
He's a big dude, 6'10", 6'11", something like that. Like, he's tall. He's a big dude. I remember I had just come back off an injury, because I'm injury prone, and I wasn't doing a whole lot of anything. I was just sort of floating in limbo, and I remember Mark Henry broke his kneecap in half on Saturday night's main event. He was supposed to wrestle Batista on the Great American Bash, and they said, and I came to TV like 2 weeks prior to the Great American Bash, and remember Vince said, do you know what you're doing at the Bash? And I said, no. And he said, you're wrestling Batista. And I said, okay. And he's like, are you ready? And I said, yeah. He's like, are you sure? I said, yeah. I said, all right. So they began this build towards Batista and I, which wasn't much of anything, really, if you look back on it. Which is funny. And I remember, Batista was just coming back off an injury. And he had been injured by Mark Henry. Mark Henry, during the match that he had with Mark Henry, he tore his triceps. And
weird.
He rehabbed it. Yeah, right? He rehabbed, and which, again, the triceps injury that I had was no fault of Batista's at all. But he had injured his triceps. And I don't think that in that scenario it was anybody's fault either. It was just luck of the draw. He had injured his triceps, rehabbed, he came back. He was supposed to be on this fucking rampage, I'm going to hurt the guy that took me out for the last 6 months or whatever, however long he'd been out. So then Mark Henry gets hurt. I take his place. Well, I should be the guy that, I'm thinking about Mark Henry when I whoop your ass kind of thing. Uh-huh. So I assumed, all right, I'm just going to get squashed and Batista's going to win and that's going to be it. Well, I got to TV that day, or I got to the pay-per-view that day, and they were like, Arn Anderson was our agent. And he said, it's going to be a competitive match. And you guys got about 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, that's fucking sweet. And we went through the whole thing. Anyway, worked it all out. And I said, well, maybe. And it's funny because, before I went there, I told my wife, I said, there's a pretty good chance that, given the current scenario and everything, I'm probably going to bleed. I'm probably going to bleed in it. It's reasonable. He's pissed off. He's just coming back. I'm going to bleed. Just to let you know. So this is in Houston, and we go and we do the match. I first 2 minutes of the match, he fucking throws my head into the steps, and I literally split the uprights.
Oh yeah, okay.
I hit the steps with my head, and I busted myself open.
Hard way.
Yeah, hard way to myself on the steps. I hit my head open. I still have a scar from it. I'm bleeding all over the place. My head is covered. Then, end of the match, he throws me into the post, and I hit my head on the post. Split my wig, and
Like, I literally, by the end of the match, I had blood, like, pouring out of my body. Like,
it was
you know the business doesn't work, right?
To
like,
toe.
You know this business.
And the funny thing is like all the internet, all the dirt sheets were saying like, you know, it's kind of stupid that WWE gives us these, like, you know, we don't need to see that kind of blood. It was like none of it was planned. None of it was planned. None of it was intentional. And I was just covered from head to toe with blood. And I went back and I looked at my phone, and I remember CM Punk at the time was in OVW, and like I got a text message from him that he said nice color, and like all these other people like, are you okay? Are you everything all right? And I'm looking through, I got 20 text messages from friends and family and stuff, and like none from my wife. So I'm like, she said she was going to order the pay-per-view. And I call her, and I'm standing in front of the mirror, and I'm fucking looking at myself, and I'm covered from head to toe in blood. This shit is drying on me now, right? And I call her, and I say, Did you watch the pay-per-view? Oh, yeah, great match. I love the match. It was a really good match.
Sounds like an Eddie Sharkey comment.
And I was like, oh, really? And I'm like, she didn't watch. Right. She didn't fucking watch. I'm catching her lying to me right now. She didn't even watch the match. And I said, did you notice anything different about the match? And she goes, well, yeah, you bled a lot. But
oh, goddamn, she did watch it.
you bled a lot, but I sort of expected it because you told me that you thought you were going to bleed. And I was like, okay, well, all right. And it was from that Taker went to Vince and said, like, I want to work with him. So that was my takeaway. Like a couple days later, he was like, hey, I saw what you did with Batista. He actually pulled me aside at a house show, and he was like, I saw what you did with Batista. I think you and I can make some money together. I went to Vince, and I told him, I want to work with you. So you and I are going to work the next, like, at least 3 pay-per-views.
That's got to be a huge compliment.
It was, like, the best compliment that I've ever received in my life.
That's unbelievable.
It was unbelievable. Yeah, and then for the next 3 pay-per-views, and then more, we worked each other.
Did you tell him that you were a Packer fan at that point or later?
Oh, he knew. He knew. And then we've always bet $100 on every. It's $100 on every Packer.
Well, you better text him because you may win $100.
Unfortunately, I'm on the losing end. I am on the losing end.
Playoffs got to be done.
Hey, I'm a cheap bastard. Remember.
Well, I mean, all right, so you've had a fantastic career. We covered TNA in part 1. We covered WWE in this lengthy episode, which is fantastic. I could sit here and ask you who's the most influential wrestler, but there's a lot of them. I could ask you what your favorite match was of all time, and you might be able to pick one out. I don't know. Do you have a favorite match of all time that you can pick out?
Well, I guess the one that like stands out to me because it was the first match that I really was like, this is awesome, was Shawn Michaels versus Steve Austin, WrestleMania 14. Okay. It was the first WrestleMania that I ever saw.
Which was fantastic.
It was the one that Austin won the title for the first time. When he was chasing, and he finally
with
won
the
it.
Stunner, Shawn Michaels was hurt, and he was going after.
And the thing was, I had no idea at the time that any of that stuff was going on. When you watch it back, it is amazing to me to see, like, you can see Shawn is really fucking hurt, right? He's really hurt, and it's just a testament to what guys are willing to do in this business to just make it happen.
We're characters.
Yeah.
What's your favorite match that you've been in?
That I've been in?
WWE, TNA, Indies, Japan, whatever it might be. Is there one that...
There's really 2 that stand out to me. There's one that I had with Matt Hardy, which I talked about before.
Which
WWE? It was WWE.
Okay.
And it was like a 3-segment match. It was after I had one Money in the Bank match. It's actually on the Matt Hardy DVD. I think there's a Matt Hardy, one of the more recent ones. I know there's a bunch.
Yep, there is.
But it was one that he also agreed, like, it was one of his favorite matches where we were on, it was SmackDown, and I remember it well. Because we were on SmackDown,
and I had the Money in the Bank briefcase, and they were starting out the show with King Booker, because King Booker had just won King of the Ring, and they were doing the King Booker thing in the ring, and then they were going to start out the show wrestling with Psychosis versus some local guy.
Sure.
And then I was going to wrestle another local guy in the next match, and then I guess Vince was in gorilla position while the King Booker segment was in the ring, and said, looked at the run sheet for the first time apparently all day, and said, like, what the fuck is this? Said, Psychosis versus a local guy, Mr. Kennedy versus a local guy. What the fuck is this? And said, make it Mr. Anderson or Mr. Kennedy versus Matt Hardy. Give him fucking 30 minutes and tell him to tear the fucking house down. And literally, Matt came up to me in gorilla position and said, like, Ken, do you know that we have a 3-segment match and we're next? And I said, yeah, fuck, whatever. He goes, no, I'm not fucking kidding. I'm not fucking kidding. And I went, okay. And then all of a sudden, Johnny Ace came around the corner and goes, all right, guys, all right. Let's come up with a finish. Well, first of all, let's come up with a break spot. Because, you got to have a spot to go.
2 break spots.
To the break. Yeah. And we came up with a break spot, and then we came up with the finish, which included Shane Helms, I believe.
Who went over?
I don't even remember.
Doesn't matter.
I just remember, going out there and doing it, and it was awesome and fun, and, yeah.
And then the second match?
What's up?
The second match? You said two.
The second match was Kurt Angle. The lockdown match with Kurt Angle. And there are things... Now, one thing I must tell you about wrestling is that I personally have never had a match that I've said, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's it. Good. There's nothing that I would change about that match. Every single match that I've ever had, even the ones that I've enjoyed and the ones that I've liked, which are few and far between, I've had things that I've said to myself, fuck, why did I do that?
You'll always have that.
You
should always have that.
Do you know who went over in the Angle match? You or Angle?
I think Kurt did.
You think. But what's funny to me is there's been a lot of times that I've talked to other wrestlers or other guys or even Ryan that you work, or just like even you work a match almost like WWE works WrestleMania from beginning to end to have it culminate.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you want it all to be great, and the culmination might not be that.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that's all you're going to remember, even though the ending might be the most important.
Well, the finish is always the most important in the match.
Correct.
But you may not remember, did Angle over Angle slam? Did Ken do, whatever? But like,
but you'll know if
it was a good match or not.
I mean,
you'll know if it worked.
He's been in, how many matches do you think you had? Thousands, right? But like the people who were at the event walk away knowing like, this is a good match. This was a good match, and Angle went over or Ken went over. Like,
they might not even remember that. They might not even remember like who went over in the particular match.
I'm sure they do.
Maybe it's just me that is trying to eliminate it from my memory because it wasn't me that went over.
Well, dude, I mean, we
trying to equivocate. Like, it wasn't. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me because it wasn't me.
What else do we have? Do we have anything else?
Oh, man, we've talked a ton. We took a lot of your time.
God dang,
we took a lot of time from your wife, and I apologize, but it's this has been the most, I guess, gratifying podcast that I've done because I've looked up to you when I broke into the business. You were a guy who I thought, I'm going to approach this dude. If he's nice to me, great. If he's going to be a Sean Navarre prick to me, that's cool too. Sean, hello.
Hey, no. Hey, let me tell you something. Sean is a prick.
But you were great to me, and you were nice. And it was you, Aries, and Sean, and then it was me, Arya, and Craven in this generation who looked up to you three, thinking like we could be the next three. And it didn't go that route, but it's a little. I don't know if it's tougher. I don't think it's tougher now. It just didn't happen the way we wanted to. But for you to share all this time with us, it's been absolutely fantastic. And if
I just have to say, like, I got turned on to you guys when you came across my Twitter timeline with the Carmine DeSpirito interview.
And if he owed you money, I hope he paid you off.
No, the thing is like, I hadn't talked to Carmine in years.
That's what he said, yeah.
And he said that in the podcast. He was like, I haven't talked to you. And that's the thing, like, in life, and I find this with the friends that I had in high school and before I ever got in the wrestling business. You go your separate ways and you do your separate things. Life happens.
Right.
But I have always maintained that those people who were my friends in high school are still my friends now. And when you meet up with those people, you just carry on and you just continue about life. And Carmine happens to be one of those guys. When I listen to your podcast, it's funny how you tend to forget about certain aspects of your life until it's reintroduced. Recently, one of my best friends, the guy that A, introduced me to bodybuilding, and B, introduced me to pro wrestling, I was just told after, I kept in touch with him minimally for the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I was just told, like, this guy's got cancer. And it's amazing how the people that you sort of, you don't forget them, right? But they just, because life happens, you just move on. You forget, sort of, in a way, how important, how meaningful those people are in your lives. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, Carmine DeSpirito was so instrumental in my life that I just, I don't know, same as with Mike Mercury and Eric Kraus and Eric Plecken, Mike Kraus and Eric Plecken, Mike Mercury, Eric Hammers were their wrestling names. Carmine. These guys were so instrumental in my career. And not that I forgot them, but life happens and you just sort of move on or whatever. Right. And then, like, listening to your podcast sort of brought me back down that rabbit hole. And I was just like so moved by it that I reached out to him again. And we haven't connected yet, but I hope to connect with him soon because he was a great guy and he was important in my career. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if it wasn't for Carmine, and Cabana wouldn't be talking to you. Yeah. Punk wouldn't be talking to anybody.
A lot of guys, myself included.
A lot of guys. So yeah. Anyway.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be back again.
All right.
What's up, guys? This is professional wrestler Renny D.
And this is Travis Dirty Mr.
We're the hosts of The Pencil, the professional wrestling podcast, every Tuesday.
On iTunes, YouTube, PodBean, and Stitcher.
We bring you guests from the WWE, TNA, and all the major independent wrestling promotions around the world.
Follow us on Twitter @PencilPodcast or on the World Wide Web, pencilpodcast.com.